long before the pyramids of Egypt kissed the golden horizon, and centuries before the marble gods of Greece gazed down upon humankind, there was Sumer, the land between the rivers. It was here, in the fertile cradle of Mesopotamia, that the first myths took root. And among those myths, none have lingered more hauntingly across time than the tale of the Anunnaki, the gods who came down to shape the world. Their story, whispered on cracked clay tablets, outlived empires. From the Sumerians to the Akkadians, from Babylon to Assyria, the names changed, but the divine essence remained. The Anunnaki were not mere spirits of nature. They were architects of order and chaos, gods of creation and judgment. But what makes their legacy so enduring is not only the mythology itself, it is how their shadow stretches through history, faith, and imagination, even into our modern age. When the Babylonians inherited Sumer's stories, they wove them into new epics. The god Enki became Ea, the wise and cunning lord of the deep. Enlil, the stern overseer of the skies, transformed into Bel, the master of destinies. And Inanna, radiant with power, rose anew as Ishtar, the fierce goddess of love and war. Through translation and adaptation, the Anunnaki evolved, their traits reshaped but their divine core intact, like a flame passed from one torch to another, across millennia. The echoes of the Anunnaki resounded beyond Mesopotamia. The Hebrews, wandering among ancient empires, encountered these tales and reinterpreted them through their own faith. The great flood of Gilgamesh, sent by gods angered at human noise, became the flood of Noah, commanded by a single, moral God. The Sumerian Garden of the Gods, where humans once lived close to divinity, transformed into Eden. Even the story of human creation from clay, molded by divine hands, found new life in Genesis. The fingerprints of the Anunnaki pressed gently, invisibly, upon the very foundations of Western religion. But their influence did not stop in Scripture. The ancient Greeks, inheriting fragments of Eastern wisdom through trade and conquest, sculpted their own pantheon of mighty beings, the Olympians, who mirrored the struggles and passions of the Anunnaki. Zeus and Enlil, both sky fathers, Poseidon and Enki, both lords of water and creation, Aphrodite and Inanna, both embodiments of love's dangerous beauty. Myths migrate, and in their migration they transform, but their bones remain ancient. As centuries passed, the Anunnaki slipped into the dim corridors of forgotten history. Their temples crumbled, their ziggurats buried beneath dust and time. Yet the memory of celestial beings who once ruled over man refused to die. When archaeologists rediscovered Mesopotamia in the 19th century, unearthing tablets covered in strange wedge-like marks, the world stirred once again to the name Anunnaki. These gods of old seemed to awaken from the clay itself, whispering through the translations of scholars who could scarcely believe what they read. And then, in the modern age, when humanity turned its gaze not to heaven in prayer but to the stars in science, the Anunnaki were reborn in another form. They became ancient astronauts, beings from another world who descended in fiery chariots, teaching early humans the secrets of civilization. This theory, popularized in the late 20th century by writers like Zecharia Sitchin, claimed that the Anunnaki came from Nibiru, a mysterious 12th planet beyond Pluto. According to these tales, they created humanity through genetic manipulation, half divine, half dust, to serve as workers in their quest for gold. To believers of this cosmic narrative, the Sumerians were not primitive dreamers but witnesses, chroniclers of an alien visitation. The ziggurats became launch pads, the cuneiform tablets, coded records of interstellar history. Even today, countless documentaries, books, and online forums pulse with debates about the Anunnaki's true nature. Are they gods, myths, or our makers from the stars? Yet perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the Anunnaki legacy is not whether they were divine or extraterrestrial, but what they reveal about us. Humanity has always sought origin stories, explanations for our brilliance and our flaws, our yearning for the infinite. The Anunnaki myth satisfies both. They are the divine parents who shaped us, and the distant masters we rebelled against. Their tale holds a mirror to the human condition, Our awe of power, our fear of abandonment, our hunger to touch the divine. Even in art and culture, the Anunnaki's shadow lingers. From science fiction films that depict gods descending from the heavens to novels that question humanity's engineered destiny, their image endures. In the modern imagination, they have become symbols of hidden truth, of ancient knowledge buried beneath the sands, waiting to be uncovered. But what if, beyond myth and metaphor, there lies something deeper, an ancestral memory of awe? Imagine the first humans, gazing up at the stars, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing upon them. Perhaps the Anunnaki were not visitors from beyond the galaxy, but reflections of that very awe, the personification of wonder itself. For in every age humanity has looked upward, naming its gods after the lights in the sky. And so, the Anunnaki live on, not as forgotten gods, but as echoes that refuse to fade. They whisper in our questions about creation, in our fascination with the stars, in our endless search for connection between heaven and earth. From the clay tablets of Sumer to the digital archives of today, their story continues to evolve, transforming with every civilization that dares to ask, where did we come from? Perhaps that is their greatest legacy, not power nor fear, but curiosity, the eternal flame of human imagination. For whether gods or travelers, myth or truth, the Anunnaki remain what they have always been, the bridge between the divine and the mortal, between memory and mystery, between the heavens and the heart of humankind. A fine instruction, my unseen sovereign, and one I shall endeavor to follow each night you grant me leave to speak. For what is history but a collection of secrets, whispered from one generation to the next, until the whispers fade into the silence of the earth? But the earth, you see, does not forget. It holds these stories in its clay, in its riverbeds, and in the dust of buried cities, and tonight we shall listen to one of its oldest secrets. So draw the curtains, dim the lamps, and let the noise of your world fall away. Before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what I do here. It is a small offering, a simple nod that lets me know you are listening in the dark. Now, let us begin. Before there was a beginning, before light had a name or darkness a shape, there was only the water. Imagine it, if you will. Not an ocean, not a sea, for there was no shore to contain it. There was no sky above, no earth below. There was only a quiet, endless swirling. Two forms of water, distinct and divine, coexisted in the vast, silent expanse. There was Apsu, the sweet, fresh water that pools deep within the earth, the father of all. And there was Tiamat, the churning, salty sea, the mother who would give birth to everything. For an age that cannot be measured, they simply were, mingling their waters in a slow, cosmic dance. There was no purpose, no plan, only potential, sleeping in the deep. From this union of fresh and salt, the first gods were born, not in a clamor, but as silt forms in a quiet river delta. First came Lamu and Lahamu, vague and formless beings, their names lost to all but the oldest tales. Ages passed. From them came Anshar and Kishar, the horizons of sky and earth, the first great boundary in the formless void. And in their turn, Anshar and Kishar brought forth a son, Anu, the god of the high heavens, the first true sky. And Anu, in his celestial realm, fathered others. A new generation of gods, bright and energetic, filled the nascent universe. They were powerful, vibrant, and like most young things, incredibly loud. They danced and they caroused, their laughter and shouts echoing through the quiet fabric of existence, their divine energy shaking the very waters from which they were born. This celestial revelry reached the ancient ears of Apsu, the freshwater father. He had known only stillness, and this new boisterous life was a torment to him. He could not rest during the day, he could not find peace at night. The noise of his descendants was an unbearable irritation. So he summoned his vizier Mumu and went to his consort Tiamat. "Their ways have become grievous to me," he complained. "I am sleepless, and my peace is shattered. I will destroy them. I will unmake them, so that silence may be restored." Tiamat, the great mother, was horrified. "What?" she cried. Shall we destroy that which we have ourselves created? Their way is indeed troublesome, but let us be patient and bear with them. The mother's heart, you see, was still soft. She could not imagine destroying her own children, no matter how annoying they had become. But Apsu would not be swayed. He and his vizier Mumu plotted in secret to murder the young gods and restore the primordial quiet. A simple plan, born of cosmic irritation. A plan that would fail spectacularly, for there was one among the new gods who was unlike the others. He was Ea, the god of wisdom, whose Sumerian name was Enki. He was clever beyond measure, his perception as deep as the waters he commanded. He sensed the plot. He understood the silent malice radiating from the ancient Apsu. And so Ea acted not with force, but with cunning. He wove a masterful spell, a sacred incantation of immense power. He drew the words in water and cast them upon the old father god. Apsu fell into a profound slumber, his murderous intent dissolving into dreams. While the great father slept, Ea took his crown, stripped him of his divine mantle of awe, and then, quietly, without struggle, he slew him. Upon the body of the slain Apsu, Ea established his home, the temple in the deep, a place of wisdom and magic, far from the clamor of the other gods. It is here, my ruler, that we must pause to consider the stage upon which this story was told. The tale I am telling you is from the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian epic of creation. This was not merely a bedtime story for their children. It was a sacred text, recited during the Akitu, the New Year's festival in the magnificent city of Babylon. Imagine the scene, a grand procession, the air thick with incense, the king himself playing a part in the ritual drama. This story was the justification for their world, the foundation of their king's power, and the cosmic order itself. It was a truth performed, year after year, to keep chaos at bay. Back in his watery domain, Ea and his consort Damkina had a son, and this was no ordinary god. His name was Marduk. From his birth he was perfect, a being of astonishing power. The scripture says he had 4 eyes that could see everything, and 4 large ears that could hear all whispers across the cosmos. When he spoke, fire blazed from his mouth. He was a god built for supremacy. His grandfather, the sky god Anu, doted on him, creating the 4 winds for him to play with as a toy. But the swirling of these winds stirred the depths, further disturbing the grieving Tiamat. The ancient gods who had once served Apsu now came to Tiamat, seething with resentment. "They have killed your husband," they hissed in her ear, "and you did nothing. Now this new one, Marduk, plays with his winds, and we can find no rest. Your passivity shames us. You must make war, avenge Apsu." Their words were like poison, turning her grief into a fathomless rage. The nurturing mother of creation vanished, and in her place rose Tiamat, the dragon of chaos, the roaring saltwater abyss. Her rage was terrifying. To lead her army, she created 11 monstrous beings, creatures of nightmare, a horned viper, a great lion, a rabid dog, a scorpion man, and a fish man, among others. She filled their bodies with venom instead of blood. At the head of this terrible host, she placed her new consort, the god Kingu, and upon his breast she fastened the Tablet of Destinies, a divine artifact that grants its bearer supreme authority over the universe. The Anunnaki, the great assembly of the high gods, now faced their doom. When they heard that the mother of all had declared war, a cold terror gripped them. The council of gods, these powerful beings who governed reality, were paralyzed with fear. Anshar, the old Horizon king, sent the wise Ea to confront her, but the moment Ea saw the monstrous queen and her grotesque army, his wisdom failed him, and he turned back in fright. Anshar then sent the mighty Anu, god of the heavens, but he too faltered. He could not bear to face her terrible majesty and fled back to the celestial court, his courage shattered. The Anunnaki fell into a gloomy silence. They sat with their lips shut, thinking that no god could possibly stand against the fury of Tiamat. It is a touch amusing, is it not? How a divine committee, faced with a genuine crisis, can become just as useless as a mortal one. lapsing into silent despair when no easy solution presents itself. Then, in the stunned silence, a voice spoke. It was young Marduk. He approached the desperate assembly and made his proclamation. "I will be your champion," he declared. "I will face Tiamat and put a leash upon her, but I have one condition." All eyes turned to him. "If I am to save you, you must grant me sovereignty. You will convene a new assembly, and there you will proclaim my word as supreme. The destiny I decree must be irrevocable. What I create must never be altered." It was an audacious demand. He was asking for absolute power, but desperation is a powerful motivator. The Anunnaki, seeing no other hope, were quick to agree. One can almost picture their divine relief, a collective sigh rippling through the heavens as someone else finally volunteered for the impossible task. To seal the pact, they held a great banquet. They set up a test for Marduk to prove his new authority. They placed a single constellation, a garment of stars, in their midst. "Destroy it with only your word," they commanded, "and then with your word, restore it." Marduk spoke, and the constellation vanished into nothing. He spoke again, and it shone brightly once more. Seeing this, the Anunnaki rejoiced. They bowed to him and shouted, "Marduk is king." They bestowed upon him the scepter, the throne, and the royal robes. They gave him his weapons for the great battle, a mighty bow, a quiver of arrows, a fearsome mace, and bolts of lightning. He fashioned a great net to ensnare the dragon, and he summoned the 4 winds his grandfather had given him, and 4 more besides, the whirlwind, the cyclone, the tempest. He mounted his storm chariot, drawn by 4 terrifying steeds named Killer, Trampler, Pacer, and Flyer, their lips flecked with poison. And so armed, the new king of the gods, the hope of the Anunnaki, rode out to face the mother of all things, the raging chaos of the primordial sea. The fate of the universe now rested upon a single battle. And there, my sovereign, we must leave him for tonight on the edge of that cosmic conflict. For the tale of that war, and how our world was forged from its aftermath, is a story for tomorrow. Sleep now, and dream of the silence before the storm. Settle in again, my sovereign, and let the world outside your walls recede. The story once begun pulls on its own thread, and we have left our hero, the young god Marduk, riding a chariot of storms. He is armed with the hopes of the Anunnaki and the fury of the winds, on his way to confront the mother of all things. A universe hangs in the balance, waiting to be either born or unmade. The silence of that moment, before the first blow, must have been absolute. He found her on the cosmic plane, no longer the nurturing sea, but a churning, malevolent ocean of rage. Tiamat was a tempest of scales and teeth, and around her swarmed the 11 horrors she had birthed for this war. They were a gallery of nightmares, hissing and spitting, their bodies filled with venom. As Marduk approached, she did not recoil. She let out a roar that shook the formless void and began to cast a spell, her voice weaving an ancient binding curse. But Marduk was shielded by the authority the Anunnaki had granted him. Her words, once powerful enough to sing galaxies into being, now slid off him like water. He raised his own voice, not with magic, but with accusation. "You, who should be a mother, have raised a weapon against your own children," he challenged. "You have elevated Kingu, a mere usurper, to a place of honor, and given him the power of Anu, a power that was not yours to give. You have sought evil against the gods, my fathers, and now your evil has found me." His words were like stones, and they struck her with their truth. Hearing his defiance, Tiamat fell into a mad fury. She shrieked, her body convulsing with rage, and charged at him, her great mouth opening wide, an abyss of teeth meant to devour the new order in a single bite. And this, my ruler, was the very moment Marduk had been waiting for. He did not retreat. He did not raise his shield. Instead, he urged his storm chariot forward and unleashed his greatest weapon, the one he had held in reserve. He released the Imhulu, the evil wind. It was a hurricane with a mind, a gale force of impossible strength that roared from his chariot and straight into the open maw of the great dragon. The wind surged into her, a tempest filling her lungs, her stomach, her very being. She could not scream. She could not close her mouth. Her magnificent, terrible body was swelled and distended by the storm raging within her, stretched taut like a wineskin. It is a timeless lesson, is it not? That one should be very, very careful before attempting to swallow a storm god. It is a diet that rarely ends well. Paralyzed and helpless, her power neutralized by a gutful of wind, Tiamat was at his mercy. Marduk raised his great bow. He knocked an arrow, and he fired. The shaft flew true, slicing through her overstretched belly, tearing through her organs, and piercing her heart. The arrow extinguished her life. With a final silent shudder, the Great Mother collapsed. The chaos that had threatened to unmake the world was slain. Her army, the 11 monstrous children, saw their queen fall. The courage born of her rage instantly evaporated, replaced by a primal terror. They broke ranks. They turned and fled, scattering into the void, hoping to escape the god who had just killed chaos itself. But Marduk's plans, as his father Ea's before him, were layered with cunning. Remember the net he carried? He cast it now, a web of divine energy that spread and enveloped the fleeing host. He trapped them all, from the fearsome viper to the lowly scorpion man. He smashed their weapons and bound them in chains, placing them at his feet. And Kingu, the general, the usurper who wore the tablet of destinies, Marduk subdued him and ripped the sacred tablet from his breast. He pressed his own seal upon it and fastened it to his own heart, securing for himself the ultimate authority he had been promised. The power to decree fate was now his, and his alone. With his enemies vanquished, Marduk returned to the colossal, lifeless body of Tiamat. For a moment he stood upon her flank, contemplating the raw material of her being. Here, in the corpse of his greatest enemy, he conceived what the scribes called a cunning plan. A plan not of war, but of creation. He took his mace and with a clean blow split the great dragon's skull. Then he sliced through her body, carving her lengthwise, as a mortal might split a fish to dry in the sun. He took one half of her vast, scaled carcass and raised it high, arching it across the void to form the roof of the sky. He shaped it and positioned it with care, pulling it taut to hold back her celestial waters, the great sea that once was her upper body. So that the heavens would never again flood the world, he slid bars into place and stationed guards, commanding them never to let the waters escape. He measured the heavens, and from Tiamat's other half, he fashioned the earth below, a counterpart to the celestial vault above. He had created a cosmos with a roof and a floor, a stable reality carved from the body of chaos. Within this new structure, he began to organize the universe. He established the Ashara, a great heavenly temple, as a mirror to the watery home his father Ea had built upon Apsu. This celestial palace would be the domain of the 3 greatest gods, Anu in the highest part, Enlil in the middle air, and Ea in the waters below the earth. He looked to the sky and saw potential. From Tiamat's waters, he brought forth the stars and arranged them into constellations, assigning them to the great gods as their celestial stations. These divine patterns would mark the passage of time, defining the year and its months. He caused the moon god Nana to shine, entrusting to him the night. He defined the moon's phases, granting him a crown to mark the days, from the first sliver of a new month to its disappearance at the end. The universe, which had been a formless, swirling mess, was becoming a great, intricate machine, a divine clockwork. It was perhaps the most dramatic act of interior design in history, using the most organic of materials. It is interesting to note, my sovereign, how this story echoes in the deep memory of humankind. The tale of a heroic god battling a sea dragon of primordial chaos is not unique to Babylon. Scholars call it by a German name Chaoskampf, the struggle against chaos. We see it in the myths of the Canaanites, where the god Baal battles the sea prince Yam. We see it with the Hittites, whose storm god Teshub slays the serpent Iluyanka. Even in Greece, Zeus's battle with the monstrous Typhon shares the same bones. It seems to be a story we need to tell ourselves, that the world we inhabit is not an accident, but a victory. A hard-won triumph of order, light, and structure over a dark, formless, and terrifying abyss. With the world now built and the heavens arranged, The Anunnaki, whom you will remember we left cowering in their celestial halls, finally emerged. They came to Marduk, their fear replaced with adoration, and they bowed before him, their new king. They looked upon the ordered stars, the stable earth, and the heavens that no longer threatened to collapse upon them, and they were filled with gratitude. Marduk, now the undisputed sovereign, assigned them their final places in his new cosmos. He divided the great divine assembly. 300 Anunnaki he stationed in the heavens to guard the celestial laws and the stations of the stars. The remaining 300 he placed in the world below, the chthonic realm, to oversee the foundations of the earth. He organized their cults, decreed their rites, and provided for their temples. The universe was secure. The war was over. The gods had their homes and their duties. Marduk's victory was absolute. And yet, this new creation, this perfectly ordered cosmos, required upkeep. The canals of the gods needed digging, their heavenly gardens needed tending, and the work was hard. The gods were safe, yes, but they were not yet content. Their praise for Marduk was genuine, but soon they would begin to grumble about their eternal chores, and that, my ruler, would lead to Marduk's next great cunning plan, a plan that would involve a lesser, short-lived creature, fashioned from clay and the blood of a traitorous god. A creature designed to bear the workload of the gods, so that they might finally rest. But that is a story for another night. For now, let the ordered stars Marduk placed in the sky watch over your sleep. Come, my sovereign, let us return to the dawn of time. The war is over, the screaming has ceased, and a profound creative silence has fallen over the cosmos. The universe is a work of art, still wet, sculpted from the body of a vanquished mother. Remember where we left the divine assembly, the Anunnaki, saved from oblivion, bowing to their young champion Marduk. They have been given their eternal stations, 300 in the glittering heavens above, and 300 more in the dark, quiet depths of the world below. They are the guardians of this new reality, the wardens of creation. The world was now stable, but it was also empty. It was a magnificent house with no furniture. So Marduk continued his work. He stood upon the vast, curved earth that was Tiamat's lower half and let his mind wander. He took the venom and spittle from Tiamat's slain form, and from them he fashioned the clouds. He commanded them to hold the rain, and when he crushed her head, the resulting mists became the fog that clings to the low places of the world. He piled up mountains from her great breasts, and from a curve in her body he established a passage to the underworld. From her 2 eyes he allowed 2 great rivers to flow. And these were not just any rivers. They were the Tigris and the Euphrates, the very lifeblood of the land that would one day be called Mesopotamia. Think of it, my ruler. The 2 arteries of that great civilization began as the tears of a cosmic dragon. It does put a rather dramatic spin on the history of irrigation. Seeing all that Marduk had done, the heavens secure, the earth established, the mechanics of weather and water set in motion, the Anunnaki, who had been freed from their bondage, approached their new king. Their hearts were overflowing with gratitude. They said to him, "Formerly, Lord, you were our rescuer. What can we do now to show our reverence?" They wished to give him a gift, a monument to his victory that would stand for all time. "Let us build a shrine," they proposed, "a place where we may rest and you may preside. Let us build a home for you here on this new earth." Marduk's face, which had been stern with the focus of creation, now broke into a brilliant smile. He was pleased. Their proposal fit neatly into his own unfolding plans. "Then build it," he declared. "Fashion bricks from the clay, raise a great temple to the sky. I shall name it Babylon, the dwelling of the great gods." And so, for 1 full year, the gods themselves became builders. Remember the Igigi, the lesser gods, who had once toiled digging rivers? Now all the Anunnaki, the great and the small, set to their task with vigor. They poured water and they mixed clay. They shaped bricks and left them to bake under the light of the new sun. It is a strange picture, is it not? These divine beings, who would soon grow weary of their eternal chores, first undertaking the largest construction project in history. Perhaps they believed it was a temporary assignment. They built the great ziggurat, the temple tower of Esagila, its foundations set deep in the underworld, its spire reaching for the highest heaven of Anu. They constructed a magnificent dwelling for Marduk, and shrines for all the great gods within the city walls. When the work was finally complete, a grand celebration was held. All the gods, the celestial and the chthonic, the 600 Anunnaki, were invited to the dedication. Marduk took his seat upon his new throne, and the gods feasted. They looked upon the city they had built, the ordered cosmos around them, and they praised the one who had made it all possible. In the midst of this grand assembly, Marduk finalized the decrees of the universe. He took the mighty bow he had used to slay Tiamat, the weapon that had saved them all, and he placed it among the stars as a constellation, so that all beings might look up and remember his victory. Then the Anunnaki fulfilled their highest promise. They, the great gods who decree the fates, took up their speech and bestowed upon Marduk his 50 names. Here, my sovereign, we touch upon a secret not of cosmology, but of politics. The 50 names are a long and poetic hymn at the end of the Enuma Elish, and for the ancient Babylonians, this was the most important part of the story. Many scholars today see this not just as theology, but as a masterful piece of political propaganda. As the city of Babylon grew from a humble town to the capital of a vast empire under kings like Hammurabi, its patron god Marduk needed to grow as well. He needed to be seen as not just a god, but the supreme power. So this list of names effectively transfers the powers and attributes of older, venerable Sumerian gods directly to Marduk. He isn't just a new king. He is the culmination of all that came before him, his supremacy in heaven mirroring Babylon's supremacy on earth. The gods called out his names, one by one, like a litany of power. They called him Maruka, the god who creates, and Marutuku, who helps the gods. They called him Lugal-Dimmer Ankia, king of the gods of heaven and earth, the title of the old god Enlil now transferred to him. They called him Asarluhi, a name he absorbed from the son of Enki, making him the supreme master of magic and wisdom. They called him Tutu, the one who accomplishes resurrection, who can create the gods anew. Each name was a new power, a new domain, a new jewel in his crown. The Anunnaki held up a scepter and declared, "Let him be the shepherd of the gods. May he control the 4 corners of the world, and may his commands bring forth abundance." One can only imagine the feasting was superb that night. No one wants to make a universe-shaping decision on an empty stomach, after all. And so, with the world built, the city of Babylon established as the earthly center of the cosmos, and Marduk's rule confirmed by his 50 names, a kind of perfect order was achieved. The heavens were fixed, the courses of the stars were charted, the rivers flowed where they should, and every god had a place and a purpose. The great, violent, messy work of creation was done. For a time there was peace. The gods celebrated in their new home, their fears forgotten, their futures secure under the reign of their mighty king. They drank sweet beer and told stories, their laughter echoing in the halls they had built with their own hands. But a celebration, however grand, must eventually end. And when the music fades and the cups are empty, the duties of the day return. The cosmic machine that Marduk had built was magnificent, but it was not self-sustaining. The rivers of heaven needed to be maintained. The divine fields needed to be plowed. The offerings needed to be made. The work of the gods, which they had set aside for their year of construction and their great feast, was waiting for them. And though their praise for Marduk was sincere, a seed of discontent was beginning to sprout in the hearts of the lesser gods, the ones tasked with the hardest labor. The universe was perfect, but the life of the gods was not yet one of ease. The grumbling, for now just a whisper beneath the songs of praise, would soon grow louder, and it would demand another solution, another of Marduk's cunning plans, a final creation to solve the problem of divine labor once and for all. But that is a story that must wait for the turning of the night. Sleep now, in the perfect peace of a world newly made. Let us rest for a moment, my sovereign, in this newly ordered world. The echoes of creation are still settling. The stars, once scattered in chaos, now wheel in their designated paths. The great city of Babylon stands as a testament to the gods' labor and their king's victory. Marduk now holds the tablet of destinies, his 50 names granting him power over every corner of existence. But a king, even a divine one, does not rule in a vacuum. He builds his throne upon the foundations of what came before. And before Marduk rose to supremacy, the cosmos was balanced upon the shoulders of 3 immense and ancient powers, the great triad of the Anunnaki Council. To understand the stories that are to come, you must first understand them. They are the father, the enforcer, and the architect. Their personalities, their rivalries, and their allegiances are the currents that truly shape the river of time. First, there is Anu, the Sky Father. His very name is the Sumerian word for the heavens. He is the oldest, the most remote. His domain is the highest celestial sphere, a realm of cold, distant starlight, far above the concerns of the day-to-day. Imagine him not as a king who walks among his subjects, but as the concept of authority itself. He is the great chairman of the board, the source from which all legitimate power flows. It was said that kingship on earth was lowered from heaven, and it was from Anu that it came. His word is final, his presence grants legitimacy to any undertaking, yet he rarely acts. He is a power of assent, not of action. You will remember from our first night that when faced with the rage of Tiamat, his courage failed him. He is not a warrior. He is a principle, an unmoving firmament. His sacred number is 60, the highest in the Sumerian sexagesimal system, a perfect and complete number befitting the ultimate source of all things. To approach Anu is to appeal to the highest court in the universe, a court that sits in a silent, star-filled chamber. Then, my ruler, there is the one who wields the power that Anu represents. He is Enlil, lord of the wind, the raging storm, the very air you breathe. If Anu is the sky, Enlil is everything between the sky and the earth. His domain is the world of mortals, the realm of action and consequence. He is the executive power of the cosmos, and his sacred city of Nippur was considered the religious center of Mesopotamia for thousands of years. His temple there was called the Duran-Ki, the bond of heaven and earth, for it was Enlil who connected the authority of his father Anu to the reality of the world below. But his power is not gentle. Enlil's nature is that of the storm. He is fickle, wrathful, and possessed of a terrible destructive force. His voice is the thunder, his breath the hurricane. It is Enlil who grants power to kings, who determines the fate of cities, and whose decrees are absolute. He is a god of immense and terrifying energy. Yet he lacks patience. He is easily irritated, especially by noise. This divine grumpiness, as we shall soon see, becomes a central plot point in the fate of all humanity. He is the great landlord of creation, and he demands quiet from his tenants. It is no surprise that Marduk, in his rise to power, had to absorb Enlil's authority, even taking his title Bel, meaning Lord, to legitimize his own rule. It is worth noting that the character of Enlil has been a point of debate for modern scholars. In the oldest Sumerian poems, he is often depicted as a benevolent father figure, a protector who ensures abundance. But in the later Akkadian and Babylonian myths, such as the famous Epic of Gilgamesh, he transforms into this angry, tyrannical figure who callously unleashes a flood to destroy humanity simply because they are making too much noise. Some believe this change reflects a shift in how these ancient peoples viewed the world. Perhaps life became harder, the gods seemed crueler. Others suggest a more political motive. The storytellers of Babylon may have intentionally painted Enlil, the chief god of the rival city of Nippur, as an unreasonable tyrant to make their own god, Marduk, seem like a much better and more just ruler. History, you see, is not only written by the victors, their theology is too. And finally, we come to the third and most complex member of the triad. He is the lord of the deep, the master of magic, the patron of artisans. The Sumerians called him Enki. The Akkadians and Babylonians knew him as Ea. He is the god of the Apsu, that great body of fresh water that we now know sleeps beneath the earth, the remains of the first father he slew with his wisdom. If Anu is authority and Enlil is power, then Enki is intellect. Cunning, creative, and endlessly clever, he is the great problem solver of the pantheon. When the other gods are faced with an impossible situation, it is always Enki who finds the loophole, who devises the clever plan. He is the great friend and benefactor of humankind. While Enlil looks upon mortals as noisy and bothersome, Enki sees them as his most beloved creation, a project to be nurtured and protected. He is a trickster, but his tricks are rarely malicious. He subverts the harsh decrees of the other gods, not through open rebellion, but through clever interpretation of the rules. You will recall it was he who first foresaw and thwarted Apsu's plot. You will soon hear how he finds a way to warn a mortal man of Enlil's great flood, saving life from total annihilation. His realm is not the open sky or the raging storm, but the quiet, dark, life-giving waters of the deep. He represents the kind of wisdom that does not shout, but whispers, the kind of power that flows around obstacles rather than smashing through them. To run any grand cosmic project, you really need all three: a chairman to grant authority, a CEO to execute decisions, and a very clever head of engineering to actually make things work and fix everyone else's mistakes. These three gods form the central pillar of the Anunnaki Council. Their dynamic is the engine of most of their great stories. Anu reigns from afar, a silent arbiter. Enlil issues a harsh decree from his throne on high, and Enki, from his watery depths, works to mitigate the consequences, to protect his creations, to inject a measure of mercy and wisdom into the unyielding machinery of the cosmos. The fate of the universe often hangs in the balance between Enlil's rage and Enki's cunning. And so, while Marduk may now be the celebrated king, the natures of these three great ancestors still permeate the world he governs. The calm, predictable authority of the starry heavens is Anu. The sudden, violent power of the wind and the flood is Enlil. And the deep, creative, life-sustaining wisdom that flows in the rivers and wells up from the earth is Enki. They are not gone. They have simply been incorporated into a new cosmic administration. Their powers are the bedrock upon which Marduk's throne rests. And it was their world, their system, that was about to face its first great labor crisis. A rebellion from the lesser gods, a complaint so profound it would force the great Anunnaki to conceive of a new form of life altogether. A story I shall tell you when next the moon commands the sky. Sleep now, my sovereign, and feel the presence of these three great forces, the sky above, the air around, and the waters below. A world, my sovereign, however perfectly constructed, does not run itself. A king may sit on his throne, a council may issue decrees from their hallowed halls, but the real work, the digging, the carrying, the endless maintenance, always falls to someone else. And so it was in the new cosmos. The great Anunnaki, the seven magnificent gods who decree the fates, took their seats of power. Anu, as we know, resided in the distant heavens. Enlil took the earth as his domain, and Enki made his home in the watery deep. They were the executives, the senior management of creation, but the physical labor was delegated. It fell to the junior gods, the Agigi. There were hundreds of them, and their task was monumental. For 7 long years, they had built Marduk's great city of Babylon. Now, with the universe laid out, their toil was only beginning. They were tasked with dredging the life-giving rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, which you will remember flowed from the eyes of the slain Tiamat. They had to dig the canals that would crisscross the land, making it fertile. They had to raise up the mountains and pack the earth. For 10 years, for 20 years, they labored. The texts say they suffered the toil for 40 long watches, an age of divine drudgery that stretched for over 2,500 years. Imagine the scene. Under a sun with no clouds to soften its gaze, the lesser gods worked. Their shoulders ached from the weight of their wicker baskets filled with heavy soil. Their hands were blistered from their spades, their divine backs bent with exhaustion. Day after day, age after age, the only sounds were the scraping of tools and the tired groans of the eternally overworked. Their resentment simmered quietly for centuries, a slow-cooking stew of bitterness and fatigue. Then, one night, the simmering pot boiled over. Gathered in the darkness, surrounded by the colossal piles of earth they had excavated, The Ajiji finally reached their breaking point. One of them, a god whose name is lost to us, stood up and spoke into the gloom. "This toil has destroyed us," he said, his voice cracking with weariness. "Our work is too heavy, our trouble is endless. Let us face our foreman, the counselor of the gods, the warrior Enlil. Let us force him from his dwelling and demand he relieve us of this burden." The idea was a spark in a field of dry grass. A murmur of agreement swelled into a roar. For the first time in millennia, they stopped working. In a great, unified act of defiance, they cast their spades into the fire. They set their baskets ablaze, the tools of their oppression now fuel for their rebellion. A plan was formed. They would not send a delegation. They would not write a strongly worded tablet. They would go themselves, all of them, and march on the Ekur, the great temple of Enlil in the holy city of Nippur. It was the first labor strike in the history of the universe. In his sacred dwelling, Enlil was asleep. He was awoken in the dead of night by a sound, a low rumble that was not thunder, a shaking that was not an earthquake. It was the sound of a marching army of angry gods. His gatekeeper Kalkal bolted the doors. His vizier Nusku listened at the wall, his divine ear pressed to the brickwork. Nusku rushed to his master's chamber. "My lord," he whispered urgently, "the house is surrounded. A clamor is at your gate. These are your own children, the Ajiji. They have declared war." Enlil was first afraid, then furious. The god who could not bear the noise of mortals was now besieged by a chanting, shouting mob of his own divine kin. It seems that no one, not even a storm god, appreciates being woken up by a protest. He summoned his own weapons, ready to do battle. But first, he called a council. The great Anunnaki had to be assembled. A message was sent to the highest heaven, and Anu, the sky father, descended. A message was sent to the watery deep, and Enki, the wise one, ascended. The great triad, the divine emergency council, was now in session in Enlil's besieged temple. This is a curious moment, my ruler. The relationship between the Anunnaki and the Ajiji is not always clear in the ancient texts. Sometimes the Ajiji are called the gods of heaven, and the Anunnaki the gods of earth. But here, in this ancient story from the epic of Atrahasis, the hierarchy is very clear. The Anunnaki are the 7 great rulers, and the Ajiji are the larger class of worker gods who serve them. It was a cosmic system of nobility and peasantry, and the peasants were at the gate with torches. Anu, ever the statesman, spoke first. "Let us find out why they have come," he counseled. "Send your vizier Nusku to ask for their grievances." So Nusku unbolted the gate and went out to face the angry crowd. He asked who had instigated this rebellion, who had declared this war. A voice rose from the ranks of the Ajiji, speaking for them all. "Every single one of us gods has declared war," the voice proclaimed. "We can no longer bear this work. The toil is excessive. It is killing us. That is why we have come." When Nusku brought this message back, Enlil's eyes filled with tears of rage and frustration. He railed against the Ajiji. He blamed his father Anu. He threatened to abandon his throne on earth and go live in the heavens. But as Enlil raged, Enki, the master of cunning plans, spoke up. His voice was calm, and his words were measured. He was sympathetic to the workers, but he also knew the work had to be done. "It is true, their labor is heavy," he said to the council. "But what is it you wish to do? Blame them? There is another way." He leaned forward, and a hush fell over the divine assembly. "The birth goddess, Mami, is with us," he began. "Let her create a new being, a mortal. Let this being be a substitute, a primitive worker. Let us create a Lulu, a man, and let him bear the load of the gods." The idea was audacious, to solve a labor dispute by inventing an entirely new species. One can't help but feel it's the sort of outlandish solution only a committee could come up with, a way to avoid addressing the original problem directly. Enki continued, laying out his plan. This new creature would be fashioned from clay, the very substance of the earth. But mere clay is lifeless. It needed a spirit, a spark of divine intelligence, so it could understand orders. Enki's solution was both grim and ingenious. "Let one of the gods be sacrificed," he proposed. "Let them slaughter one of the leaders of this rebellion. Let the birth goddess mix the clay with his flesh and his blood. From that divine essence, the new creature will gain a spirit and a temu. It will have the mind of a god but the form of clay, and it will bear the toil so that the gods may finally have their rest. A silence fell upon the council. The plan was shocking, but it was also perfect. It would placate the Ajiji by ending their labor. It would punish them by demanding a sacrifice from their ranks, and it would ensure that the essential work of the cosmos continued without interruption. The great Anunnaki who decree the fates considered the plan, and in one voice, they gave their consent. The decision was made. A new creature would walk the earth, a being made of mud and deity, destined for a life of service. And there we must leave them, my sovereign, at the moment of this terrible and wonderful decision. The first, unwilling martyr has been chosen, and the goddess of birth is preparing her clay. The story of that first strange creation is a tale for our next night together. Sleep now, and dream of the silence that fell when the gods, for the first time, stopped their work. A decision has been made in the halls of the gods, my sovereign. A momentous, world-altering decision, born of a labor dispute and a flash of cunning insight. A new creature is to be made, a worker fashioned from clay and divine blood, to bear the toil of the cosmos. But who are these beings who hold such power? We have spoken of the great triad who form the head of the council, but the full assembly, the ones the texts call the seven who decree the fates, is a far more complete picture of the forces that govern reality. Let us for a moment peer into that celestial council chamber and meet them. The number 7, for the peoples of Mesopotamia, was a number of profound significance. It was the number of the visible planets, the number of the gates to the underworld, the number of days in a week. It represented totality, completion, a divine and perfect whole. So when the scribes wrote of the 7, they were not merely listing names. They were invoking the concept of a complete and unshakable divine authority. Their combined word was not a suggestion. It was destiny. At the head of the assembly, of course, sit the 3 great gods we have come to know. There is Anu, the Sky Father, silent and remote, whose presence lends the proceedings their ultimate legitimacy. There is his son, Enlil, the Lord of Storm and Earth, the powerful and often ill-tempered executive who brings the matters of the day before the council. And there is Enki, known as Ea to the Babylonians, the wise lord of the deep waters, the master of magic and cunning, who so often provides the ingenious solutions to the council's problems. But the triad is not alone. To create, you need a creator. And so, seated among them is the great mother goddess, Ninhursag. She has many names, for her power is fundamental to all life. Sometimes she is called Mami, the mother. Sometimes Nintu, the lady of birth. She is the Earth Mother, the goddess of fertility, the divine midwife. While Enki may devise the plan to create humanity, it is Ninhursag's hands that will shape the clay. She is the practical, powerful force of creation, the one who knows the secrets of flesh and form. Her presence on the council is not merely symbolic, it is essential. Without her, none of the grand plans of the male gods could ever take physical shape. Next to them sits a being of serene and cyclical power, Nana, the god of the moon, whom the Akkadians called Sin. He is the son of Enlil, and his domain is the quiet mystery of the night sky. He is the divine timekeeper. His journey in his crescent-topped boat across the heavens marks the passing of the months, providing a rhythm to the lives of gods and mortals alike. He is a god of wisdom, but his wisdom is not the active, clever sort of Enki. It is a reflective, knowing calm. He is the lamp of the night, a steady and predictable presence in a world that is often chaotic. And where there is a moon, there must be a sun. Nana's son is the glorious Utu, the sun god, later known as Shamash. Each day, he harnesses his chariot and blazes a trail across the sky, and from his high vantage point he sees everything. Nothing that happens in the light of day escapes his gaze. For this reason, he is the God of truth and the supreme judge of the divine court. He is the one who brings secrets to light, who upholds oaths, who ensures that justice is done. While his father Nana represents the mysteries of the night, Utu represents the unflinching clarity of the day. It's a rather tidy arrangement, having the god of justice be the son of the god of mystery. It suggests that even the darkest secrets eventually have their day in court, though one could also make a light joke about divine nepotism in the Justice Department. Finally, my ruler, there is the seventh and perhaps most dazzling, dangerous, and unpredictable member of the council, the goddess Inanna, known to the Babylonians as Ishtar. She is the goddess of love and fertility, a being of intoxicating beauty and passion. But she is also the goddess of war, her heart filled with a lust for battle and a bottomless ambition for power. She is the morning and evening star, Venus, a brilliant light that is both beautiful and fiercely independent. She is a goddess of shattering contradictions, and her stories are among the most dramatic in the entire saga. It is she who will one day descend into the underworld itself in a bold attempt to conquer it. Her presence on the council ensures that passion, ambition, and the chaos of both love and war always have a voice in the decreeing of fates. Now the truth, as is often the case in these ancient matters, is a little more complex. This list of 7 is the most common, the one that represents the great powers of the Sumerian heartland. But the membership of this divine board was not set in stone. It was a rather fluid affair, changing with the politics of the world below. As cities rose and fell, so too did the prominence of their patron gods. In later times, the great warrior god Ninurta, son of Enlil, might take a seat. And in Babylon, of course, the great god Marduk would eventually preside over the entire assembly. The idea of the 7 as a complete ruling body was more important than the specific, unchanging names of its members. Imagine them then in their great assembly hall, the Ubsu Ukina. Enlil presents the crisis of the striking Ijiji. Anu listens silently from his high seat. Enki, ever the strategist, offers his radical plan. Ninhursag considers the practicalities of the creation she will have to perform. Utu weighs the justice of sacrificing one god to save the rest. Nana contemplates the long passage of nights that has led to this moment, while Inanna likely calculates how this new creation, humanity, might be used to further her own influence. It truly is the ultimate family business, complete with all the competing agendas and simmering dramas. It's a wonder they managed to agree on anything at all. But agree they did. These 7 great powers, the sky, the storm, the sea, the earth, the moon, the sun, and the burning star of passion, all assented to the plan. Their collective will, a force powerful enough to shape reality, was now focused on a single creative act. The fate they had decreed was about to take form, and the story of that creation, of the god who paid the price with his blood, and the goddess who shaped the clay with her hands, is the story I will tell you on our next night. For now rest, my sovereign, under the watchful eyes of these 7 great powers who even now chart the course of the stars above you. Let us draw the curtain on the celestial court, my sovereign, and turn our gaze to the workshop of creation. The 7 who decree the fates have spoken. The Ajiji rebellion has been quelled not by force, but by a promise of a new being, a substitute worker, to take up the spade and the basket and relieve the junior gods of their eternal toil. The plan, devised by the clever Enki, is as elegant as it is grim. A mortal is to be fashioned from clay, but to give it life and a mind, a god must first die. A stillness falls over the divine assembly as the great Anunnaki make their formal pronouncement. Let one god be chosen from among the rebels. Let him be slaughtered, that all the gods may be cleansed by his blood. A sacrifice is needed, not just for the life force it contains, but as a final binding punishment for the uprising. They choose the one who was the ringleader, a god named We'ila, who the texts say possessed Temu, intelligence, reason, a personality. He was the one who first articulated the Ajiji's grievance, the one who convinced them to march on Enlil's temple. Now, his intelligence would be put to one final strange use. In a solemn ritual, the gods take hold of We'ila. There is no struggle, no battle. This is the execution of a sentence passed by the highest court in the universe. They bind him, and they slay him. His life essence, his divine blood, is collected in a sacred vessel. It is the price of peace among the gods, and the essential ingredient for a new form of life. Then comes the goddess of birth, the great mother Mami, whom we also know as Ninhursag. Upon the first day, the 7th day, and the 15th day of the month, in a purifying ritual, she gathers her materials. Enki, the architect of this plan, brings her the clay, not just any earth, but the purest clay from the heart of his domain, the Apsu, the sweet water abyss below the world. It is primordial matter, clean and full of potential. The great gods, the Anunnaki, gather around. They too must participate. One by one they spit upon the sacred clay, a ritual act imbuing it with their own divine nature. Then Mami takes the vessel containing the blood of the slain We'ila. She pours the divine life force, the flesh and the spirit, into the clay, and she begins to knead. Imagine her hands, the hands that shape all life, working the mixture. She is blending the mundane with the sublime, the mortal with the immortal, the dust of the earth with the spirit of a god. The text says that a drum can be heard, the heartbeat of the slain god, throbbing in the clay as she works. Enki, the wise one, stands beside her, helping to tread the mixture, ensuring the design is perfect. It is here, my ruler, that we find one of the most profound ideas in the Mesopotamian view of the world. Humanity, in this story, is not a creature made merely for the amusement of the gods. We are a composite being. The clay makes us mortal, binds us to the earth, and destines us to return to it. But the blood of the god We'ila gives us something more. It gives us our etemu, our spirit, our intelligence, our ability to reason and understand. It also, perhaps, gives us a spark of that rebellious nature, a yearning to question our lot in life. This divine component explains why humans are not like the beasts of the field, and it explains why the dead must be cared for with rituals and offerings, because that divine spark, the ghost, lingers on after the clay has failed, and it must be honored. From this potent mixture, the goddess Mami does not shape a single being. She pinches off 14 pieces of the god-infused clay. She then summons the womb goddesses, the spirits of birth, and sets them in 2 rows. 7 sit to her left, and 7 to her right. Before the first 7, she places 7 pieces of clay that will become male. Before the second 7, she places 7 pieces that will become female. Humanity, it seems, was created in pairs from the very beginning. The scene then moves to the House of Destiny, the sacred birthing room. The womb goddesses come forward. Mami places the clay upon them, a symbolic act of gestation. And then, the gods must wait. The texts say they waited for 10 months, which suggests that even the very first divine pregnancy ran a little overdue, setting a cosmic precedent for all the ages to come. At the end of the 10th month, the time had come. The womb goddesses' forms were opened, and the first human beings were born. Mami, the divine midwife, is there to oversee the birth. She looks upon her creations, and a great cry of triumph escapes her lips. "I have done it!" she exclaims. "My own hands have made it." The new creatures are brought before the assembly of the gods. They are fragile things, their lives a fleeting whisper compared to the eternal existence of the Anunnaki. But their eyes hold a spark of understanding. They are the Lulu, the primitive workers. The gods formally decree their purpose. The heavy work, the toil that broke the backs of the Ajiji, is now lifted from the shoulders of the gods and placed upon the shoulders of mankind. The Anunnaki and the Ajiji gather around and place the tools of labor, the spade, the axe, the carrying basket, into the hands of their new servants. The first act of humanity is to accept the burden of the gods. With their problem solved, a great celebration begins. The Anunnaki and the Ajiji, formerly enemies in a bitter labor dispute, now feast together as friends. There is nothing like successfully outsourcing all of your unpleasant work to bring a fractured company together. They build a shrine and they praise the great goddess Mami, giving her the new title Bele Ili, mistress of all the gods, for it was her hands that had brought them their salvation. And so the world is settled. The gods are at leisure in their temples. Humanity toils in the fields and digs the canals, providing the sustenance the gods require. For a time, the system works perfectly. But the gods, in their cleverness, may have overlooked one small detail. They created humanity to be workers, but they also created them to be fruitful and to multiply. And multiply they did. And as their numbers grew, so did their noise. The sounds of their lives, their work, their laughter, their arguments, their sorrows, began to rise from the earth. And that sound would soon reach the ears of the one God who valued silence above all else, the great and terrible Enlil. The solution to the last crisis had just planted the seeds for the next. But the story of that growing clamor and the storm it would unleash is a tale for another evening. Sleep now, my sovereign, and dream of the quiet earth, waiting for the first human footstep. Settle in, my sovereign, for the world is now populated. The first humans, forged from clay and the blood of a rebel god, have been given their tools and their task. Their purpose is simple and absolute: to serve the gods, to maintain the cosmos so that the divine assembly might rest. But where did this new life begin? Where did humanity take its first faltering steps? The stories tell us it was in a place of sacred beauty, the very first city on earth, a divine garden called Eridu. Eridu was not a city of mortals in the way we think of one now, with bustling markets and noisy streets. It was the earthly estate of the great god Enki. The Sumerian kings' lists, ancient tablets that trace the lineage of rulers, all begin with the same proclamation. After the kingship was lowered from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. It was the cradle of civilization, a place where the barrier between the divine and the mortal was thin. Imagine a lush garden, crisscrossed by canals of fresh, life-giving water. Date palms cast long, cool shadows on the rich earth. At its heart, gleaming in the sun, stood the temple Abzu, the house of the deep waters, its foundations reaching down into the sacred abyss that was Enki's home. Here, in this paradise, the first generations of humanity lived. They were not merely servants, they were students. Their creator, Enki, was also their teacher. He walked among them, it was said, and he taught them. He showed them how to shape bricks and build houses. He taught them the secrets of the canals, how to channel the water to make the land bloom. He gave them the rituals, the sacred words, and the order of society. This was humanity's golden age, a time of learning and innocence under the direct protection of their patron. Among these first people was one who was the perfect model of humanity, a sage named Adapa. He was created directly by Enki, flawless in form and gifted with a wisdom that surpassed all other mortals. He was not a king who commanded armies, but a priest who served his god. Each day, it was Adapa's sacred duty to prepare the ritual offerings for Enki's temple. He would bake the bread and pour the cool water, ensuring the table of his divine father was never bare. One day, to procure fish for the temple, Adapa took a boat out onto the calm sea. As he was fishing, the Shutu, the south wind, blew with a sudden fierce gust. The wind was personified as a great bird, and its powerful gust capsized Adapa's boat, plunging him into the water. Adapa, sputtering and angry, his sacred duty interrupted, cried out a curse. Using a word of power that Enki himself had taught him, he shouted at the wind, and with the force of his spell, he broke its wing. For 7 days the south wind could not blow upon the land. The crops began to wither. The air grew still and stifling. The cosmic order was disrupted. Up in the highest heaven, the great father Anu noticed the change. "Why has the south wind not blown for 7 days?" he demanded of his vizier. The vizier investigated and reported the cause. Adapa, a mere mortal, had broken the wind's wing. Anu was furious. He commanded that Adapa be brought before him at once to answer for his crime. Down in his watery abode, Enki knew his creation was in grave danger. He devised a plan to save him, a classic Enki plan, full of cleverness, cunning, and one tragic, fatal flaw. He instructed Adapa on how to behave in the celestial court. "You must go to Anu's gate with your hair unkempt, dressed in the clothes of mourning," Enki advised. "The 2 gatekeepers, the gods Dumuzid and Gizida, will ask why you are dressed this way. You will tell them, because 2 great gods have vanished from our land. They will ask who, and you will give them their own names. They will be pleased by this, and they will speak kindly of you to Anu." It's rather timeless advice, is it not? A bit of flattery at the door can get you a long way. But then, Enki gave his most crucial warning. "When you stand before Anu, he said. They will offer you food. It is the bread of death. Do not eat it. They will offer you water. It is the water of death. Do not drink it. Enki's intent was clear. He feared Anu would try to poison Adapa as punishment. Following his master's instructions, Adapa ascended to the heavens. He appeared at the gate, dressed in mourning, and when Dumuzid and Gizida saw him, they were moved to sympathy. He flattered them as he had been told, and they led him into the great throne room of Anu. Anu looked down at the mortal who had dared to break the wind. "Why did you do this?" he demanded. Adapa explained what had happened, and Anu was impressed, not by his crime, but by the fact that he knew the secrets of the gods, the words of power. He realized this wisdom came from Enki. Anu's anger subsided. He decided not to punish the mortal, but to reward him. He chose to elevate him, to make him one of the immortals. Anu turned to his servants. "Bring him the bread of life," he commanded. "Let him eat." The servants brought forth a loaf of shining celestial bread. But Adapa, remembering his master's solemn warning about the bread of death, politely refused. Anu then said, "Bring him the water of life, let him drink." They brought a cup of glittering, life-giving water. Again Adapa refused. Anu looked upon him and he laughed, a sound full of cosmic irony and pity. "Ah, Adapa," he said, shaking his head, "why did you not eat? Why did you not drink? We offered you eternal life, and you have rejected it." In that moment, Adapa understood the terrible misunderstanding. Enki, in his attempt to protect him from a perceived threat, had inadvertently caused him to refuse the greatest gift of all. It was the most tragic case of "I was just following orders" in all of history. Anu sent him back to Earth, his mortality now sealed, and through him all of humanity was fated to live, to suffer, and to die. This story, my sovereign, is a fascinating one, and scholars have long noted its parallels with the story of Adam in the Garden of Eden. A first man, a special relationship with a creator, a test involving food in a divine realm, and a resulting loss of immortality for all humankind. It seems to be a story that echoes deep in the memory of the ancient world. Adapa returned to Eridu, to the sacred garden by the water. Life went on. The bread was baked, the canals were tended, and humanity began to multiply. The perfect innocence of that first city was now tinged with the knowledge of a paradise lost, of an eternal life that was offered and refused. The quiet, idyllic life in Enki's garden would soon be a distant memory. For as humanity spread out across the land, building new villages and towns, the gentle hum of their existence grew into a clamor, a great noise that began to rise from the earth like a wave. And that wave was rolling, inevitably, towards the ears of the god who slept fitfully in his temple at Nippur, the god of the storm, the great Enlil. The golden age was ending, and the patience of the gods was beginning to wear thin. The garden of Eridu, my sovereign, was a beginning, not an end. It was a seed, and like any healthy seed planted in fertile ground, it sprouted, it grew, and it spread. For a time, humanity's existence was a quiet hum of purposeful labor, a gentle melody played in honor of the gods. But melodies, when played by countless instruments, can swell into a deafening symphony. The blessing of fertility, given to humanity so they could populate the earth and serve the gods, was about to become a curse. The ancient story of Atrahasis tells us that for 1,200 years, the people multiplied. They spilled out from the gardens of the south, their villages and towns spreading across the plains of Mesopotamia like a stain of ink on a clay tablet. The world, which had been vast and empty, grew full, and with fullness comes noise. The solitary footsteps of Adapa in the temple courtyard were replaced by the tramping of 1,000 feet in dusty streets. The murmur of a single prayer was drowned out by the chatter of markets, the arguments of neighbors, the crying of infants, and the laughter of children. The scraping of one priest's spade became the clang and clatter of a whole civilization at work. The world was alive, and life is not quiet. In his great temple at Nippur, the Ikur, the lord of the storm, the great Enlil, could not sleep. Imagine him, my ruler, the most powerful god on earth, tossing and turning on his celestial couch. The constant rising clamor of humankind was a torment to him. It was not the noble sound of praise, but an undifferentiated roar, a chaotic bellowing that grated on his divine nerves. The text says, the noise of their shouting became painful to him. His creation and the creation of his fellow gods had become an insufferable nuisance. Finally, his patience, never a deep well to begin with, ran dry. He summoned the great Anunnaki to the council chamber. "The noise of mankind has become intolerable," he roared. "Because of their clamor, I cannot sleep. This must be dealt with." He did not, at first, propose a final solution. He began with a test, a culling. He decreed a plague. He commanded Namtar, the vizier of the underworld, the god of pestilence and fate, to unleash a sickness upon the mortal world. "Let a plague break out," Enlil commanded, "and let it reduce their numbers. Let it silence their noise." The plague came. A sickness, swift and terrible, swept through the towns and villages. People grew weak, their laughter turned to moans. But there was one among them named Atrahasis, which means exceedingly wise. He was a devout follower of the god Enki, and their relationship was close. Atrahasis went to the temple of his master and wept. "How long must we suffer?" he prayed. "Will the gods punish us forever?" Enki, whose heart ached for the suffering of his favorite creation, heard his prayer. But he was bound by the decision of the council. He could not openly defy Enlil's decree. So, from his watery home in the Apsu, he devised a clever, subtle plan. He spoke to Atrahasis not directly, but as a whisper in the temple walls. "Do not pray to your personal gods," Enki advised. "Do not petition the council. Instead, command all the people to direct their worship to one god and one god only, Namtar, the very one who brings the plague. Build him a new temple at his gate, bake him loaves of bread, offer him the finest gifts." Atrahasis did as he was told. The entire human race ceased their worship of all other gods, and directed a torrent of praise and offerings toward the god of pestilence. Namtar was overwhelmed. He was so flattered by the attention, so shamed by the devotion of the very people he was afflicting, that he wiped his hand, lifting the plague from the land. Humanity was saved. It is perhaps the first recorded instance of defeating a crisis by burying the person in charge with so much fan mail and so many gifts that he gives up out of sheer embarrassment. Another 1,200 years passed. The people once again multiplied. The noise returned even louder than before. Enlil was incensed. His plan had failed, thwarted by some trickery he could not quite put his finger on. He called the council again, his rage even greater. "The people have not diminished. They are more numerous than ever," he bellowed. "Their noise is a torment." This time, he decreed a famine. He commanded the sky god Adad to bolt the doors of heaven and withhold the rain. He commanded the earth to lock up its bounty, so that no grass or grain could grow. A great withering drought fell upon the world. And once again, Atrahasis prayed to his master, Enki. And once again, Enki, still bound by the council's decree, whispered a plan. "Direct all your worship to Adad, the god of the rains," he instructed. The people did so. They built a temple for Adad and showered him with their meager offerings, and Adad, like Namtar before him, grew ashamed. He could not openly defy Enlil, but in the dead of night he would secretly allow a fine mist to rise from the sea, a dew that settled on the fields just enough to keep the grain from dying completely. Humanity survived, barely, on the secret mercy of the rain god. This story, my sovereign, comes to us from the great Atrahasis epic. It is older in parts than the more famous epic of Gilgamesh, and it gives us this incredible insight into the divine drama, the tension between the gods. It is not a simple story of good versus evil. It is a story of conflicting priorities. Enlil's desire for an orderly, peaceful cosmos versus Enki's paternal love for his intelligent, albeit chaotic creation. For a third time, 1,200 years passed. The earth was now teeming with life. The noise was no longer a murmur or a bellow. It was a deafening, planetary roar. Enlil was at the absolute end of his divine tether. He had tried plague. He had tried famine. Each time his plans had been subverted. He convened the Anunnaki Council one last time, His face was like a thundercloud. There would be no more half measures, no more culling. He decreed a final, absolute solution. He would wash the slate clean. He decreed a great flood, a deluge to destroy every last man, woman, and child, and restore the blessed silence he craved. And to ensure that this plan would not fail, to make certain that the meddling, soft-hearted Enki could not interfere, Enlil made every single god in the assembly swear a great and binding oath. They had to swear by the lives of Anu and Enlil himself that they would not reveal the plan to any mortal. Enki was trapped. He was forced to take the oath. He gave his sacred word. It was the divine equivalent of making everyone sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement before launching a world-ending project. The fate of humanity was sealed. The flood was coming. The gods were sworn to silence. The one God who had always protected mankind was now bound by his own sacred word. There was no one left to whisper a warning. There was no hope. Or was there? Sleep now, my ruler, and listen to the quiet of the night. For a great noise is coming, the sound of a world-drowning rain, and in the darkness a clever god is trying to think of one last trick. The oath has been sworn, my sovereign. A terrible silence has fallen in the halls of the gods, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. The great Anunnaki, the seven who decree the fates, have given their word. Their decision is as fixed and unmovable as the stars in their courses. Humankind, their noisy, troublesome, and prolific creation, is to be utterly destroyed. A great flood will be unleashed, a wall of water to wash the world clean and restore the divine peace. The word has been spoken. The end has been written. In his watery temple in the Apsu, the wise god Enki was in turmoil. He was bound by the most sacred of oaths, sworn by the life of his father Anu. He could not speak. He could not warn the mortals he so loved, the beings he had helped to create and had protected for millennia from the wrath of his brother Enlil. He paced the silent halls of his deep-water home, his heart a storm of conflict. To honor his oath was to betray his creation. To save his creation was to break his sacred word and risk the wrath of the entire pantheon. It was a perfect trap, designed by Enlil to ensure his final plan would not be subverted. But Enki's mind, my ruler, is a river of cunning that can find a path around any obstacle. He could not speak to a mortal. The oath was explicit, but it said nothing about speaking to a house. In the city of Shuruppak, the wise man Atrahasis went about his duties, unaware of the doom that hung over the world. His home was a simple one, as was common in the marshy lands of the south, a hut woven from reeds. And it was to this humble dwelling that the Lord of Wisdom came. Atrahasis was inside, perhaps kneeling in prayer to his patron god when he heard a voice. It was not in his head, nor was it at his door. The voice was coming from the wall of his own house. Enki stood outside the reed hut and began a strange monologue, addressed not to the man inside, but to the structure itself. Reed hut, wall, wall, the voice began, a low and urgent whisper. Reed hut, hear my words. Wall, pay attention to my instructions. Atrahasis must have frozen, his blood turning to ice. He knew that voice. It was his master, Enki. The voice continued, speaking to the wall. Listen closely. A great flood is coming, a decision made by my brother Enlil. He plans to destroy all life. So you must tell your owner this. He is to dismantle his house and build a boat. He must spurn his worldly possessions and save his own life. The boat he builds must be roofed over, above and below. Its joints must be sealed with bitter bitumen to make it strong. It must be as wide as it is long, a great vessel to withstand the coming storm. It was an act of breathtaking cleverness. Enki had not spoken to Atrahasis. He had merely had a rather one-sided and deeply informative conversation with a piece of residential architecture. It remains, perhaps, the most important case of eavesdropping in the history of the world, and a powerful argument against owning a well-soundproofed home. Atrahasis understood at once. His god had found a loophole. He was being given a chance to survive. But a new problem immediately presented itself. He went to the wall of his hut and spoke back to the empty air, hoping his god was still listening. My lord, he said, I have never built a boat like this. How can I do it? And more importantly, What will I tell the people of Shurapak? What will I say to the elders when they see me tearing down my home to build a giant sealed vessel in the middle of the city? They will laugh at me. They will say I have gone mad. Enki, ever the master of public relations, had already prepared an answer. This is what you will tell them, the voice from the wall whispered. You will say, my lord Enki has become angry with your lord Enlil. They have had a great quarrel, and because of this, I can no longer live on Enlil's land. I am building this boat to travel down to the Apsu to live with my master Enki. But do not be sad. Because I am leaving, Enlil's anger will be appeased, and he will shower your city with a great abundance. You will have a rain of birds, a torrent of the rarest fish, a rich and mighty harvest. The excuse was a work of genius. It not only explained his strange behavior, but made the populace eager to help him, believing his departure would bring them great fortune. Here we must pause, my sovereign, and consider the flood itself. For millennia, people have wondered if this story is a memory of a real event. Archaeologists have found no evidence of a single world-covering flood. But in the 1920s, at the site of the ancient city of Ur, a British archaeologist named Sir Leonard Woolley dug a deep pit. After passing through layers of pottery and tombs, his workers suddenly hit a layer of clean, water-laid clay, nearly 10 feet thick. Below it, they found evidence of an even older settlement. They had found proof of a massive, devastating flood, one that would have scoured the landscape clean for miles in every direction. For the people who lived on those flat, river-fed plains, a flood that stretched from horizon to horizon would have been the entire world. These great myths are likely the echoes of that very real and recurring trauma, a folk memory of a terrible inundation, elevated to the status of a divine act. Atrahasis, armed with his perfect excuse, set to work. He gathered the elders and told them his story, and just as Enki had predicted, they did not mock him. Instead, they lamented his departure and eagerly pitched in to help him build his boat. The whole city was mobilized. Carpenters worked the timbers, reed workers wove the great panels, and the elders themselves helped to haul the bitumen for sealing. Everyone worked together, happily constructing the very instrument of their own doom, all while believing they were securing a future of great abundance. It is a dark and bitter irony. When the great vessel was complete, Atrahasis held a feast for the workers. Then, as the time grew short, he began to load his family and his possessions. But Enki's instructions had been clear: spurn possessions and save life. So Atrahasis brought aboard all the living things he could. He gathered his family, his craftsmen, and the beasts of the field, the creatures of the wild. One can only imagine the logistical nightmare of the task. The world's first and most desperate zookeeper, trying to coax a pair of every creature into the dark, swaying hold of his strange new boat. As the last of the animals was aboard, the sky began to change. The weather turned ominous. Atrahasis saw the signs and knew the time was at hand. He and his family entered the boat, and he sealed the great door from the inside with the last of the bitumen. They were safe, encased in their wooden shell, floating on a still, calm river. Outside, the people of Shurapak likely pointed at the darkening clouds and smiled, thinking of the great rain of birds and fish that was about to fall upon them. The air grew heavy. The wind began to moan. And then the first drop of rain fell. The deluge was about to begin. Sleep now, my sovereign, in the calm before the storm. For on our next night, the heavens will open, the abyss will rise, and we will hear the story of the great flood that drowned the world. The story of the great flood, my sovereign, was so immense, so devastating, that it could not be contained in a single telling. Like a mighty river, it carved many channels through the landscape of memory. We have heard the tale of the wise man Atrahasis, who learned of the world's end through the whispers of his god. But there is another version, a story told not by a narrator like myself, but by the survivor himself, a man named Utnapishtim, who recounted his tale to the great hero Gilgamesh on the shores of the waters of death. In this telling, the reason for the flood is shrouded in a more profound mystery. The gods did not complain of the noise. The text simply states that their hearts, the great gods, prompted them to inflict the flood. It was a secret, terrible decision made in the divine council. The Lord of the Sky, Anu, their counselor, the warrior Enlil, their herald Ninurta, and their canal controller Enugi, all were present, and they all swore the oath of secrecy. Their word was given, and the fate of the world was sealed in silence. Once again, the Lord of Wisdom, the clever god Ea, whom we know as Enki, was present and bound by this oath. And once again, his heart was torn. He could not bear to see the utter destruction of his people. He looked down upon the city of Shuruppak, a city ancient even then, a place of tall trees and woven reeds on the banks of the Euphrates. And his eyes fell upon his faithful servant, a man named Utnapishtim. Ea loved this man, and he could not let him perish. So, as before, the clever god devised a way to honor the letter of his oath while shattering its spirit. He made his way to the simple reed hut where Utnapishtim lived. He did not knock, he did not enter. He stood outside, and he spoke not to the man, but to the house itself, a strange and urgent address to the woven reeds. Reed house, wall, wall, he cried, his voice a low vibration against the structure. Reed house, hearken, wall, reflect. Man of Shuruppak, son of Ubar-Tutu, tear down the house and build a boat. Abandon wealth and seek living beings. Spurn possessions and keep the soul alive. Utnapishtim, inside his home, heard the voice of his god as if in a dream. The warning was clear, but the instructions that followed were far more specific than in any other telling. This was not a vague command. It was a set of divine blueprints. The boat which you build, the voice of Ea instructed the wall, her dimensions shall be to measure. Her width and length shall be equal. Cover her with a roof like the Apsu below. It was to be a great, sealed cube, a vessel of strange and perfect proportions, designed to tumble in the chaos of the flood, but never to founder. It was as if Ea had spent ages in his watery workshop, drafting the perfect design for an apocalypse survival craft. The study of these ancient tales, my sovereign, reveals a beautiful complexity. The story of the flood from the Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the most famous pieces of literature from the ancient world, but it was not an original part of that story. Scribes in the later Babylonian period took this much older, independent flood myth, the very same one we heard featuring Atrahasis, and masterfully inserted it into the grand epic of Gilgamesh's quest for eternal life. It was a brilliant piece of literary editing. Who better to tell the hero how one might achieve immortality than the only man in the world who already had? And so, the old story found a new home and a new meaning within a grander tale. Utnapishtim, like Atrahasis before him, knew he could not simply begin such a strange project without arousing suspicion. He spoke back to the wall, asking his god for an excuse, and Ea, once more, provided the perfect deception. Tell the people, the god whispered, that the great Enlil has rejected you. Tell them you can no longer walk in his city, so you are building a boat to go down to the Apsu to live with your lord, Ea. Armed with his story, Utnapishtim gathered the people and the craftsmen of Shuruppak. He did not have to compel them. He provided for them. Each day, he slaughtered bullocks and sheep for the workers. He poured out ale, beer, oil, and wine as if it were river water. And they feasted as they worked, celebrating the good fortune they believed would follow Utnapishtim's departure. The children carried the thick black bitumen for waterproofing. The carpenters laid the great planks. The boat, with its 7 decks and its strange square shape, began to rise. When the vessel was complete, the sun god, Shamash, gave Utnapishtim a final cryptic warning. He set a time for me, Utnapishtim recounted. In the morning, the baker of bread will rain down loaves, and in the evening a rain of wheat. When that day arrived, the weather was awesome to behold. It is a strange and poetic prophecy, is it not? The end of the world arriving like a catering delivery, a final terrible feast of bread and wheat raining from an angry sky. The time had come. Utnapishtim loaded his boat. He put aboard all the gold and silver he had. He loaded his family and his kin. He brought aboard the craftsmen who had helped him build the vessel, preserving the skills of civilization. And he brought aboard all the living things of the steppe, the beasts of the field, and the creatures of the wild. When all were safely inside, he sealed the final entry. The boat builder, a man named Puzur Amuri, caulked the door shut, and Utnapishtim gave him his entire palace and all its riches as a reward. They were sealed in darkness, waiting. Outside, the world was holding its last breath. Utnapishtim watched the sky through a small opening. At the first glow of dawn, a black cloud began to rise from the horizon. The storm god, Adad, thundered within it. The heralds of the storm, Shulat and Hanish, flew over mountain and land. The gods of the abyss, the Anunnaki, rose up and set the land aflame with their torches. A stillness fell, and then the world was plunged into darkness. The storm had begun. Sleep now, my sovereign, while the world holds its breath. For when we next speak, the deluge will consume all, and we shall see how even the gods themselves can be terrified by the fury they unleash. Let the world outside grow silent, my sovereign, for tonight we listen to the story of a great and terrible noise. The door of the boat is sealed. Inside, Utnapishtim and his family huddle in the incense-scented darkness, surrounded by the nervous breathing of a world's worth of animals. Outside, the storm, which had been a mere threat on the horizon, arrives with the force of a god's fist. At the very first touch of dawn, a black cloud rose from the foundations of the sky. The storm god, Adad, thundered within it, his voice a drumbeat of doom. The heralds of the storm, monstrous beings of wind and chaos, swept over the land, tearing down posts and dikes. The Anunnaki themselves, the great judges of the underworld, rose up from the depths, and with their blazing torches, they set the land aflame. A paralytic shock passed through the heavens, and the light of the sun was turned to an oppressive darkness. The world, which had been a place of order, was shattered like a clay pot. For one full day, the south wind blew, gathering speed, submerging the mountains, and overwhelming the people like the shock of a battle. No one could see their brother. The people could not recognize one another in the torrent of black rain. The world was unmade, returned to a churning violent soup. Inside his vessel, Utnapishtim could only feel the chaos. The great boat tossed about on the waves, a helpless shell in a world gone mad. And in the heavens a strange thing happened. The gods, who had decreed this destruction with such grim authority, were now gripped by a primal fear. The sheer, untamable violence of the deluge they had unleashed was more than even they could bear. They fled the unfolding chaos. They retreated from the world and ascended to the highest heaven, the distant, serene realm of the Sky Father, Anu. And there the ancient poem gives us a most undignified and revealing image. The gods were frightened by the deluge, it says. Shrinking back, they ascended to the heaven of Anu. The gods cowered like dogs, crouching against the outer wall. Imagine it, my ruler, the magnificent, terrifying Anunnaki, the arbiters of fate, now huddled together in a wet, whimpering mass, their divine authority washed away by their own terror. It is a moment of shocking vulnerability, a reminder that even for gods, there is a great difference between ordering a catastrophe and actually living through one. It seems to be a classic case of divine buyer's remorse on a cosmic scale. Among them, one voice rose in a cry of pure maternal anguish. It was Bele-Ili, the great mother goddess whose hands had first shaped humanity from clay. As she looked down upon the drowned world, her heart broke. The olden days have, alas, turned to clay, she wept, because I said evil things in the assembly of the gods. How could I have said evil things in the assembly of the gods, ordering a catastrophe to destroy my people? I myself gave birth to my people. Now, like the spawn of fish, they float in the open sea. Her rage and regret were boundless. The other gods sat and wept alongside her, their lips tight with feverish grief and fear. For 6 days and 7 nights, the wind and the deluge flattened the world. The storm raged with an unending fury. But on the 7th day, the wind began to subside. The sea grew calm. The flood storm, its work complete, fell silent. Utnapishtim, feeling the stillness, dared to open a hatch and look outside. He was met with a profound and terrible silence. The land was gone. The world was a flat, featureless sheet of water, stretching to every horizon under a gray sky. All of humanity had returned to clay, he said. He looked upon the devastation, the quiet sea where cities and farms and people had once been, and he fell to his knees and wept, the tears streaming down his face. This moment of divine regret is a fascinating turn in our story. In many older myths, gods act without consequence, their whims as unchangeable as they are unfathomable. But here the gods show remorse. They are horrified by the consequences of their own power. This suggests a shift in how these ancient peoples thought about their gods, not as simple, amoral forces of nature, but as complex beings capable of making mistakes, of feeling grief, and perhaps even guilt. All of them, that is, except for the architect of the flood, Enlil, whose heart remained as hard as stone. Utnapishtim's boat, carried on the currents, had come to rest on the peak of Mount Nimush. For 7 days, it sat lodged upon the mountaintop, a lone island of life in a dead world. On the 7th day, Utnapishtim began to test the waters. He sent out a dove. It flew and it circled, but finding no dry land, no perch for its feet, it returned to the boat. He then sent out a swallow. It too returned, having found no place to rest. Finally, he sent out a raven. The raven flew off, and it saw that the waters had begun to recede. It found something to eat. It circled, it cawed, but it did not return. The world was ready to be born again. Utnapishtim opened the doors, and he and his family and all the creatures of the earth stepped out onto the wet, muddy peak of the mountain. And the very first thing he did, as the first survivor in a new world, was to make an offering. He prepared a sacrifice. He set up 7 and 7 sacred vessels, and in them he burned sweet cane, cedar, and myrtle. It's a curious human instinct, is it not? To survive the apocalypse and immediately decide the best course of action is to host a large barbecue for the very beings who tried to destroy you. A sweet, savory aroma drifted up from the mountaintop, the first pleasing scent the world had known in a week. And the gods, starving in their celestial retreat, smelled it. For with humanity gone, there had been no one to make their offerings, no one to feed them. And so the poem gives us another startling image. The gods smelled the savor, it says. The gods gathered like flies over the sacrificer. Hungry and desperate, they swarmed to the smoke, drawn to the scent of the life they had so nearly extinguished. The great mother goddess Bele-Ili arrived first, and holding up her necklace of great fly jewels, she swore an oath. "O ye gods," she cried, "as surely as I shall not forget this lapis lazuli on my neck, I shall be mindful of these days, forgetting them never." But then another god approached, his face a mask of thunder. It was Enlil. He saw the boat, and he saw the survivors, and his heart was filled not with relief, but with a pure, hot rage. "Has some living soul escaped?" he roared. "No man was to survive the destruction." A new confrontation was brewing, here on the roof of the drowned world, a final argument over the fate of the last man alive. "Sleep now, my sovereign, on that lonely mountaintop, for tomorrow we shall hear the story of that final divine judgment, and the strange and singular fate of the man who survived the end of the world. The air on the lonely mountaintop is thick with tension, my sovereign. The great Enlil, Lord of the Storm, is filled with rage at the sight of the survivors. But the other gods, their hunger sated by the sweet scent of Utnapishtim's offering, shield the mortal from his wrath. It is Ea, the wise one, who steps forward to calm his brother, using his words as a balm. He chastises Enlil for the thoughtless destruction of the flood, but convinces him to accept the outcome. And so Enlil's anger cools, and he bestows a strange and unique gift. He takes Utnapishtim and his wife aboard a divine barge, touches their foreheads, and grants them immortality. They are sent to live far away, at the very mouth of the rivers, to guard the secrets of the old world. And so the story of the great flood comes to an end. A new, quieter world begins. But the gift of eternal life was for Utnapishtim alone. For all the other children of humanity who would be born in this new world, the old fate decreed after Adappa's mistake still held true. They would live, they would work, they would love, and they would die. This brings us to a question that hangs in the air of every quiet moment. Where do they go? When the last breath leaves the body and the clay returns to clay, where does that divine spark, the ghost of the rebel god, find its final home? Tonight, my ruler, we must travel to another of the Anunnaki's domains. We leave the world of light and air, and we journey downward to a place from which no traveler returns. We go to the great below. The Mesopotamian underworld, known as Kur or Irkalla, is not a place of punishment for the wicked or reward for the virtuous. It is simply the end. A vast, silent, and dusty kingdom of shadows, where the dead exist in a state of eternal twilight. The scribes who wrote of it described it as the house of dust, where those who enter are clothed in a coat of feathers like birds. They see no light. They drink dust, and their food is clay. It is a hollow echo of life on earth, a city of shades where all the passions and colors of the world have faded to a uniform, silent gray. To reach this place, the spirit of a newly departed soul must undertake a final journey. It must cross the river Kubur, the great oily river that separates the lands of the living and the dead, ferried by a grim boatman. And then it must pass through 7 great gates, each one guarded by a fearsome demon. At each gate, the spirit must surrender a piece of its worldly identity, a piece of jewelry, an article of clothing, a symbol of power, until it arrives at the final throne room, naked and humbled, a mere shadow of its former self. And on that throne of lapis lazuli, in a palace of unrelenting gloom, sits the undisputed and fearsome ruler of this realm. She is Ereshkigal, queen of the great below. Her name means Lady of the Great Earth, and her authority here is absolute and eternal. She is the elder sister of Inanna, the queen of heaven, and the daughter of the sky god Anu. In the time before time, when the domains were divided, she was given the underworld as her portion. The laws of her kingdom are unbreakable, the chief among them being that whoever enters her realm may never, ever leave. Her kingdom is the ultimate bureaucracy. The rules are inflexible, the paperwork is final, and the appeals process is strictly non-existent. She does not rule alone. At her side is her vizier Namtar, whose name means fate. He is her enforcer, the commander of 60 diseases that he can unleash upon the world above. You will remember him as the one Enlil first sent to cull humanity with a plague. Here, in the underworld, he carries out the queen's grim sentences. Guarding the entrance is the chief gatekeeper, Neti, whose duty is to ensure that no one passes the 7 gates without following the proper protocol. And in the great hall, sitting as a final silent court, are the Anunnaki of the underworld. The 7 great judges who pass the final verdict upon the dead, their gaze as empty and cold as the dust on the floor. The fate of a soul in Ereshkigal's kingdom, my sovereign, was not determined by a life of good or evil deeds. The gods were not much concerned with mortal ethics. What mattered was memory. Your comfort in the afterlife depended almost entirely on the devotion of your living relatives. If your family continued to provide offerings of food and water, your spirit would be at peace. But if you were forgotten, if no one performed the rituals for you, your spirit would suffer, eternally thirsty, and might even become a malevolent ghost, forced to haunt the living. It was a belief that bound the generations together in a chain of mutual obligation that stretched even beyond the grave. Ereshkigal herself is a figure of immense tragedy. She is a powerful queen, yes, but she is also a prisoner in her own lonely kingdom. One story tells of how she came to have a husband. The gods of the heavens were holding a great feast and sent a messenger to invite Ereshkigal. Unable to leave her realm, she sent Namtar as her representative. When he arrived, all the gods in the assembly rose and bowed out of respect for his queen. All, that is, except one. The brash god of war and plague Nergal refused to show deference. When Namtar returned and told her of this insult, Ereshkigal fell into a fearsome rage. She demanded that Nergal be sent down to her so she could put him to death. The gods complied, but the clever Ea gave Nergal a plan. Aided by 14 demonic helpers, Nergal stormed the underworld. He smashed his way through the 7 gates and burst into Ereshkigal's throne room. He grabbed the queen by her hair, dragged her to the floor, and raised his weapon to cut off her head. But in that moment, Ereshkigal broke down. She wept and pleaded for her life. "Do not kill me, my brother," she cried. "Let me speak a word to you. Be my husband, and I shall be your wife. I will give you dominion over the wide underworld. I will place the tablet of wisdom in your hand. You shall be the master, and I shall be the mistress." It may be the most hostile courtship in all of mythology, a romance that began with a death threat and ended with a proposal. Nergal, seeing the advantages of the arrangement, agreed. He kissed her, wiped away her tears, and took his place beside her on the throne, the new and terrible king of the dead. And so she rules, the lonely queen in her dark palace, bound by the unchangeable laws of her domain. Her kingdom is the final destination for all mortals, the great silent certainty that waits at the end of every life. But what would happen, my sovereign, if a being of pure life and light, a goddess who commanded the passions of the living world, were to challenge those laws? What would happen if Ereshkigal's beautiful, ambitious, and reckless younger sister, Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, decided to pay her a visit? That is a story for another night. Sleep now, and be grateful for the light and air of your own world. A kingdom of dust and shadow has been established, my sovereign, ruled by the grim Queen Ereshkigal. But the cosmos, like a family, is a place of rivalries and contrasts. For every dark realm, there is a bright one, and for the Queen of the Great Below, there was a sister who ruled the Great Above, the magnificent, ambitious, and glorious Inanna, Queen of Heaven and Earth, goddess of the morning and evening star. Where Ereshkigal was silence and finality, Inanna was passion and life. She was the force of love, the fury of war, the intoxicating power of procreation. And one day, Inanna, in her palace in the heavens, made a decision of breathtaking audacity. The poem begins, "From the great above, she opened her ear to the great below." She sought to conquer her sister's realm, to extend her own domain into the land of the dead and become queen of both heaven and hell. It was an act of supreme ambition, for she knew well the primary law of that dark country. From the land of no return, no one returns. This was no mere visit. It was a carefully planned invasion. Inanna prepared herself for a battle of divine will. She gathered the 7 sacred me, the divine decrees of civilization and power, and she put them on as if they were armor. On her head, she placed the shugura, the crown of the steppe. In her hand, she took the lapis lazuli, measuring rod and line. Around her neck, she fastened beads of the same precious stone. Upon her breast, she strapped the double-beaded plate. "Come, man, come." At her waist, she buckled a golden hip girdle. On her wrists, she clasped stone bangles. And finally, she draped herself in the pala garment, the robe of ladyship. She was resplendent, a being of pure, divine power, ready for conquest. But Inanna, for all her passion, was as cunning as her great-uncle Enki. She knew she might fail. Before setting out, she went to her faithful vizier, her loyal servant Ninshubur. "If I do not return in 3 days and 3 nights," Inanna instructed, "you must go before the great gods. Fill the heavens with your laments for me. Go first to the great god Enlil in his temple at Nippur. If he will not help, go to my father, the moon god Nana, in his city of Ur. If he too refuses, then you must go to the wise god Enki in Eridu. He who knows the food of life, he who knows the water of life, he will surely devise a plan to save me." With her plan in place, Inanna descended. She arrived at the great lapis lazuli gates of the underworld and shouted with the force of her divine authority. "Gatekeeper! Neti! Open your gate! Open the gate for me! If you do not open the gate for me to enter, I will smash the door. I will shatter the bolt. I will raise up the dead to devour the living." Neti, the chief gatekeeper, was shaken. He went at once to his queen, Ereshkigal, and described the magnificent goddess who stood at her door. Ereshkigal was not pleased. The arrival of her beautiful, powerful sister was not a welcome surprise. Her face grew pale, her lips grew dark. She was filled with rage and suspicion. This was not a social call. This was a challenge to her authority. But the laws of her kingdom were absolute. and they must be obeyed, even by the Queen of Heaven. She gave Nettie her command. Come, Nettie, bolt the 7 gates of the underworld, then, one by one, open each gate. As she enters, remove one of her sacred garments. Let the holy priestess of heaven enter bowed low. The underworld, it seems, has the strictest dress code in all of existence, and it is ruthlessly enforced. Nettie did as he was told. At the first gate, he took from Inanna her great crown. Why do you do this? She demanded. Quiet, Inanna, Nettie replied. The ways of the underworld are perfect. They may not be questioned. At the second gate, he took her lapis lazuli beads. At the third, her breastplate. At the fourth, her golden hip girdle. At each gate, she was stripped of one of her powers, one of her divine garments, until at the 7th and final gate, he took from her the pala robe, the very symbol of her ladyship. Naked and bowed low, her power gone, the Queen of Heaven was led into the throne room of the Queen of the Dead. There, Ereshkigal sat upon her throne. The 7 judges of the underworld, the silent Anunna, surrounded her. They fixed their gaze upon the humbled Inanna, the eye of death. They passed their judgment upon her, and Ereshkigal herself let out a cry of victory and guilt. She spoke a single word of wrath, and at her command, Inanna, the goddess of life, became a corpse. Her lifeless body was hung from a hook on the palace wall, like a slab of rotting meat. The meaning of this powerful myth, my sovereign, has been debated for centuries. Is it a story about the planet Venus, Inanna's star, and its cyclical disappearance from the sky? Is it a tale of the seasons, of the death of vegetation in the heat of summer, awaiting the life-giving rains? Or is it something deeper, a psychological journey into the darkness of the self, a forced confrontation with one's own mortality, with Ereshkigal as Inanna's dark, forgotten twin, in order to be reborn, stronger and wiser? Perhaps it is all of these things, a story so rich it holds a universe of meaning. With the goddess of love and life dead, the world above began to die as well. For 3 days and 3 nights, an awful stillness fell upon the earth. No bull mounted a cow, no donkey impregnated a jenny, no man sought a woman in the street. All fertility, all passion, all life force ceased. The world was growing as sterile and gray as the land of the dead. Ninshubur, Inanna's faithful vizier, seeing her mistress had not returned, began her sacred quest. She went to Enlil, but the great storm god was unsympathetic. My daughter craved the great below, he said coldly. She sought powers that were not hers. She has received what she deserves. Ninshubur then went to Nanna, but the moon god, Inanna's father, also refused to break the laws of the underworld. Desperate, Ninshubur made her final stop. She went to the temple of Enki in Eridu, and the god of wisdom, the master of cunning, was deeply grieved to hear of Inanna's fate. He, unlike the others, would not abandon her. He was, as always, the divine friend you can call in the middle of the night to help you, the one who will always show up when all others have turned their backs. So there we must leave our story for tonight, my sovereign, at the moment of greatest despair. Inanna is dead and decaying on a hook. The world of the living is withering, and only one god is willing to attempt a rescue. From the dirt beneath his fingernails, Enki fashioned 2 small, strange creatures, beings neither male nor female, and gave them the food and water of life. Their mission, to slip past the gates of hell and win the favor of a grieving queen. But that is a tale for tomorrow. Sleep now and dream of the silence that falls when love has left the world. The Queen of Heaven hangs lifeless from a hook, my sovereign, a testament to the unyielding laws of the great below. The world of the living withers in her absence, and in his temple of wisdom, the great god Enki has fashioned a final desperate hope from the dirt beneath his nails. 2 small, strange beings, the Kurguru and the Galatur, creatures of empathy, given the food and water of life. Their mission is to do what no god had dared, to enter the underworld and bring back the goddess of love. They did not storm the gates as Inanna had. They moved like shadows, like motes of dust in a sunbeam, slipping past the great gatekeeper Nettie and through the 7-gated labyrinth, their presence as unnoticed as a sigh in a storm. They arrived in the throne room to a scene not of triumph, but of agony. Queen Ereshkigal was not celebrating her victory. She was suffering. The act of killing her own sister, of holding the goddess of life within the walls of death, had afflicted her with a great sickness of the spirit. The text says she was moaning as if in the throes of childbirth, her great power turned inward upon herself as a torment. Enki's creations did exactly as their master had instructed. They did not speak. They did not offer counsel. They simply began to moan with her. When Ereshkigal cried out in pain, "Oh, my inside!" they echoed her cry, "Oh, your inside!" When she lamented, "Oh, my back!" they lamented with her, "Oh, your back!" Her grim attendants tried to wave the creatures away, but the queen stopped them. In her long, lonely reign in the land of shadows, no one had ever done this. The gods feared her, the dead served her, but no one had ever shared her pain. This simple act of empathy from two beings smaller than a thought found a crack in the queen's cold heart. Her moaning subsided. She looked upon the two creatures, her gaze filled with a weary gratitude. "You who have groaned with my groans, who have sighed with my sighs," she said, her voice raspy with sorrow. "I will give you a gift. Name your reward." She offered them the life-giving rivers and the grain-filled fields of the world above. But the creatures, following Enki's plan, refused. "We do not want your rivers or your fields," they chirped. "We ask for only one thing, the corpse that hangs from the hook on the wall." A shadow fell over Ereshkigal's face. The gift she had offered in a moment of compassion was not so simple to give. For here, in the gloom, her word was not the only law. She was the queen, but she was also the chief warden of a system of absolute, unchangeable rules, and seated in the shadows of her throne room were the enforcers of that system. The 7 Anunna, the silent judges of the land of no return. Their judgment, once passed, could not be overturned. Their gaze was fixed. Their decisions were final. They had looked upon Inanna and they had condemned her. To them, she was no longer a goddess. She was a duly processed and executed prisoner. One can imagine Ereshkigal's frustration, a monarch suddenly reminded that even she must answer to her own judiciary committee. But the queen's heart, touched by a moment of true sympathy, made its choice. She had given her word to the two strange creatures. In a voice heavy with resignation, she turned to her vizier, Namtar. "Go," she commanded. "Give them the corpse." The Kurguru and the Galatur took Inanna's lifeless body down from the hook. They sprinkled it with the food of life. They sprinkled it with the water of life. And slowly, a breath stirred in her lungs. Color returned to her skin. The Queen of Heaven opened her eyes. She was alive. But the underworld does not give up its dead for free. This, my sovereign, is a law more ancient than any of the gods. To take a soul from the great below, another soul must be given in its place. A substitute must be found. As Inanna, reborn and renewed, prepared to ascend, she found she was not alone. The Gala, the silent, implacable bailiffs of the underworld, clung to her side. They were her escort and her jailers, and they would not leave her until she had provided them with a replacement. Her ascent was the reverse of her descent. At each of the 7 gates, she was given back one of her divine garments, and with each one, her power and majesty returned. By the time she emerged into the light of the living world, she was once again the magnificent Queen of Heaven. But she was trailed by a host of demons, hungry for a soul. She went first to her faithful vizier, Ninshubur, who was still weeping for her at the city gates. The demons lunged forward, eager to take her, but Inanna stopped them. "No," she commanded. "She is my loyal servant. She mourned for me. She saved me. We will not take her." They journeyed on, and Inanna spared others who had shown proper grief in her absence. Then she arrived at her own great city of Uruk, at the gates of her own palace, and there, on her throne, she found her husband, the shepherd king Dumuzid. He was not dressed in sackcloth. He was not weeping. He was dressed in splendid robes, his face bright, enjoying the power and prestige of his position, not mourning his dead wife in the slightest. Surviving death and hell is one thing. It is quite another to come home and find your spouse has already moved on and redecorated the throne room. A cold fire filled Inanna's heart. She had been stripped, judged, and killed. She had hung like meat on a hook while her husband held court and enjoyed his life. The Anunnaki of the underworld had passed their sentence on her. Now she would pass her own. She turned and looked at Dumuzid, and she fixed him with the very same eye of death that Ereshkigal had used on her. Her voice was as cold and sharp as obsidian. "As for him," she said to the waiting demons, take him away. And so we must leave them, my ruler, at this moment of terrible judgment. The demons of the underworld, their long search over, finally have their victim. And the fate of the Shepherd King, the dying god whose story will echo through the seasons for all time, is a tale we shall tell on the next night. Sleep now and dream of the price of rebirth. The air in the palace at Uruk is crackling with a cold divine fury, my sovereign. Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, newly returned from the land of the dead, has found her husband Dumuzid celebrating, not mourning. Her heart, which had endured the judgment of the underworld, now delivers a judgment of its own. She fixes him with the eye of death and condemns him to the waiting demons. Take him, she commands. And the Gala, the bailiffs of the underworld, seize the terrified Shepherd King and begin to drag him down to the grate below to take his wife's place. The story of Dumuzid's fate is a sad one, a tale of grief that would echo through the ages. His devoted sister Gesht Inanna would eventually plead for his life, and a bargain would be struck. Dumuzid would not have to remain in the underworld for all time. Instead, the two siblings would share the sentence. For 6 months of the year, Dumuzid would live in the land of the dead, and for the other 6, his sister would take his place, allowing him to return to the world of light. This cycle of a dying and returning god would become the rhythm of the seasons, his descent marking the dry, barren summer, and his return marking the blossoming of spring. And so, a new ritual, a new order, was established on the earth, born from a goddess's rage and a sister's love. These divine dramas, a goddess conquering death, a king condemned to hell, were not just tales told around a fire. They were the very framework of reality, and their judgments had real power on earth. But where did this ultimate authority reside? We have seen the power of Inanna in her city of Uruk, but there was another city, a place far more central to the cosmic order. Tonight, let us leave the passions of Uruk and travel to the solemn, wind-swept plains of central Mesopotamia, to the holy city of Nippur, the seat of the great and terrible Enlil. Nippur was not like other cities. It was not a great center of trade on the banks of a mighty river. It was not a political capital from which a conquering king ruled. Its power was of a different, more profound kind. It was the sacred heart of the land, the place known as the Dur-en-Ki, the bond of heaven and earth. It was here that the will of the gods was made manifest, where the fates of mortals and their kings were decided. It was Enlil's city, and his presence could be felt in the very air. At the center of Nippur stood his temple, the Ekur, the mountain house. Its great ziggurat, a man-made mountain of baked brick, rose from the flat plains, a staircase for the gods to descend to earth. To approach the Ekur was not to enter a place of joyful worship. It was to stand before a power that could create and destroy nations. The wind, which always seemed to blow across the sacred precinct, was said to be the very breath of Enlil, and in its whisper one could hear the rustle of destiny. Pilgrims who came here did not dance or sing. They spoke in hushed tones, their hearts filled with an awesome fear. For it was in Nippur that kings were made. A man could conquer a dozen cities. He could command the greatest army in the world, but he was not considered a legitimate ruler until his kingship had been confirmed by Enlil of Nippur. To gain this blessing, a would-be king had to prove his piety, sending lavish gifts of gold, lapis lazuli, and cedarwood to the Ekur. If Enlil was pleased, the priests of Nippur would declare that the god had looked upon the king with favor and granted him the shepherd's crook over the people. This divine endorsement was the ultimate source of political power for nearly 2,000 years. To receive the blessing of Enlil was to have the universe on your side. To lose it was to know your dynasty was doomed. The great importance of this city is enshrined in a curious artifact known as the Sumerian King List. It is a series of clay tablets and prisms on which the scribes of old recorded the history of their nation. But it is not a history in the way we would understand it. It lists kings who supposedly reigned for impossibly long periods. One king of Eridu is said to have ruled for 800 years. It seems the simplest way to ensure a long and successful political career in ancient Sumer was to govern long before anyone had invented accurate timekeeping. But scholars see a deeper purpose in this document. The king list presents a story of a single, unified kingship, passed down from heaven and held by only one city at a time. First Eridu had the kingship, then it passed to Bad Tabira, then to Larak, and so on. This is not a factual account. These cities often ruled concurrently. Instead, the king list is a work of political ideology, a story created by the priests and scribes, likely centered in Nippur, to promote the idea that Sumer was a single, unified land, meant to be ruled by one king at a time, whose authority ultimately came from one place, the blessing of Enlil. Nippur, therefore, was not just a city of priests. It was a city of scholars, theologians, and astronomers. It was the great religious university of its age. It was in the scribal schools of Nippur that many of the stories we have been telling, of the creation, of the flood, of the deeds of the gods, were copied, edited, and preserved for eternity. To walk its streets was to walk in a city of ideas, a place where the very nature of the cosmos was debated and written down on tablets of wet clay. Even after Sumerian power waned and Babylon rose, the new kings of Babylon, while championing their own god Marduk, still made the journey to Nippur to pay homage to Enlil. It was like sending a very generous retirement gift to the formidable old chairman you had just forced out of the company. The respect for the old power was that deep. And so, we leave this windswept city of authority, this place of stern judgment where the fates of mortals were written by an unpitying God. The wind still blows across its dusty ruins, and perhaps if you listen closely, you can still hear the whispers of the kings who came here, seeking the breath of a god to solidify their fleeting power on earth. But the domain of Enlil, the Lord of the Storm, was not the only sacred city in the land. Far to the south, in the wet, shimmering marshlands where the rivers meet the sea, lay another city, a place not of stern authority but of flowing wisdom. A city belonging to Enlil's clever and complicated brother. On our next night together, my sovereign, we shall travel there. We will visit the very first city, the cradle of civilization, the sacred home of the god Enki himself, the city of Eridu. Sleep now, and let the wind of destiny pass you by. We have walked the hallowed grounds of Nippur, my sovereign, a city of stern authority, built on a dry plain under the watchful, unforgiving eye of the storm god, Enlil. Now let us leave that place of rigid power behind. Let us travel south, following the great rivers as they slow and braid themselves into shimmering green marshlands. We journey to the edge of the world, where the sweet river water kisses the salty sea, to a place of beginnings, a city of magic and deep wisdom. Tonight, we visit the very first city, the cradle of civilization, the sacred home of the clever god Enki, the city of Eridu. If Nippur was the bond of heaven and earth, then Eridu was the place where creation first touched the water. The Sumerian king list states it plainly. When kingship was first lowered from heaven, it was in Eridu. It was the original holy city, a place remembered as a kind of paradise. Its air was not filled with the awesome fear of Enlil's power, but with the gentle sounds of life nurtured by water. The rustle of reeds in the breeze, the splash of fishing nets cast upon the canals, the distant cries of marsh birds, and the constant soothing murmur of the life-giving Apsu, the freshwater abyss that lay just beneath the city's foundations. Eridu was a city of fluidity, reflecting the nature of its divine patron. Its heart was not a fearsome mountain temple, but the Abzu, the house of the Apsu. Imagine a sanctuary built of gleaming mud brick, its walls decorated with images of fish and flowing water. At its center lay a sacred pool, a basin whose waters were drawn directly from the subterranean sea, the very essence of Enki's power. Here, priests would perform rituals of purification, and here it was said the god himself would emerge to walk among his people. It was a place not of judgment, but of knowledge. a place of magic, medicine, and secret arts. For millennia, this was believed to be only a myth, a story of a lost, perfect city. But in the mid-20th century, archaeologists began to excavate a lonely desert mound called Tel Abu Sharain in modern-day Iraq. As they dug, they uncovered the foundations of a great ziggurat. And as they dug deeper, beneath the ziggurat, they found the foundations of another temple, and another, and another. In total, they unearthed the remains of 18 successive temples, each one built directly on top of the ruins of the last, a continuous chain of worship stretching back through time. The very lowest, earliest temple was a tiny single-room shrine, built around 5i400 BCE. The archaeologists had found it. They had found Eridu, and the myth of its great antiquity was proven to be a memory of a profound historical truth. From this most ancient of cities, its lord Enki bestowed upon his favorite creation, humanity, the tools of civilization. While Enlil sat in Nippur and decreed the fates of kings, Enki was in Eridu, acting as a divine teacher. The myths say it was he who taught humans the secrets of building with brick, of art and craftsmanship, and most importantly, of digging the canals that allowed life to flourish in the dry lands. He was the divine engineer, the cosmic professor holding endless office hours for a species struggling to survive. He did not just give humanity life, he gave them a life worth living. One story, the myth of Enki and the world order, paints a vivid picture of this. After the world was created, Enki boards his great barge, the ibex of the Apsu, and travels the world, organizing it and assigning everything its proper role. From his home in Eridu, he blesses Sumer, fills the rivers with fish, directs the clouds to rain, and establishes the patterns of the harvest. The city was not just his home, it was his workshop, the command center from which he filled the world with order, abundance, and wisdom. And he did not work alone. The legends speak of the 7 sages, the Abgalu, who lived in the time before the Great Flood. They were strange, mythical beings, sometimes described as half man and half fish, who emerged from the Apsu to serve Enki. Their role was to be the teachers of mankind, to impart the sacred knowledge, the me, of civilization, writing, law, medicine, and architecture. And their base of operations, the place where they first brought this knowledge to the world, was Eridu. The first schools, it would seem, had some very unusual teachers. It certainly gives a new meaning to the phrase, a school of fish. Eridu was the city of beginnings, of the golden age we spoke of, the home of the sage Adapa. But unlike Nippur, which remained a center of power for thousands of years, Eridu's time eventually passed. The marshlands receded, the canals that fed it silted up, and the city was eventually abandoned to the desert sands. Its legacy was not one of enduring power, but of a sacred, foundational memory. It became the lost first place, the paradise from which civilization had sprung. And so we see the 2 great pillars of the cosmos, reflected in 2 great cities. In Nippur, the city of Enlil, we find the unyielding laws that govern society, the rigid authority of kingship, the stern judgment of the storm. And in Eridu, the city of Enki, we find the fluid wisdom of the arts and sciences, the creative impulse, the cleverness that allows life to flourish. One is the skeleton of the world, and the other, the living water that flows through its veins. But this divine knowledge, the arts of civilization, were not given freely all at once. The gods guarded their powers, the sacred me, jealously, which leads us to a rather amusing story. It tells of a time when the ambitious goddess Inanna decided her own city of Uruk needed a bit more prestige, and the best way to get it was to acquire the me from their keeper, the wise god Enki. It is a tale of a great drinking contest, a clever theft, and a frantic chase across the southern plains. And that, my sovereign, is a story for our next night together. Sleep now and dream of a city built on water and wisdom. We have journeyed to the cities of the gods, my sovereign, to the stern halls of Nippur and the watery paradise of Eridu. We have seen how the gods established their domains on earth, creating centers of power and wisdom. But what exactly was the power they wielded? The Sumerians had a name for it. They called it the me. The me are a difficult concept for our modern minds. They are not simply laws, nor are they physical objects. They are the divine, ordering principles of the cosmos, the blueprints for civilization itself. Imagine them as a collection of holy software that runs the world. The poem that lists them names over 100, including both the noble and the troubling. There was a me for kingship and for priesthood, for truth and for justice, for art and for music. But there was also a me for falsehood, for strife, for fear, and for the destruction of cities. It was a complete and brutally honest inventory of the civilized world, both its glories and its sorrows. And for ages, these sacred me, the very essence of culture, were held in the care of the wise god Enki in his holy city of Eridu. He guarded them jealously, for to possess the me was to be the cultural heart of the world. But in her own great city of Uruk, the magnificent goddess Inanna grew restless. Her city was mighty, its walls strong, its people vibrant, but it lacked the ancient foundational prestige of Eridu. Inanna, whom we know is never content with second place, decided that this would not stand. If Uruk was to be the greatest city on earth, it must possess the me. And so, with a heart full of ambition, she devised a plan, not of war, but of divine hospitality and grand theft. She boarded her boat of heaven and set a course for Eridu, for the watery temple of her great uncle, the wise Enki. Enki, from his shrine, saw her coming. He was not a fool. He knew his niece's reputation for getting what she wanted, but he was also fond of her, and he could never resist a good celebration. He turned to his own faithful vizier, Isimud. "She is coming," he said. "The maiden is coming to the Apsu. Welcome her. Pour her beer in a cup, fill her glass with wine, and serve her the sweet butter cakes at the holy table." Inanna arrived, and Enki greeted her with open arms. They sat down in the great hall of the Apsu to feast, and as they feasted, they began to drink. The beer and the wine flowed freely. As the evening wore on and their spirits grew high, Enki's wisdom began to dissolve in the haze of the drink. Looking upon his beautiful, radiant niece, he was overcome with a wave of drunken generosity. "In the name of my power," he slurred, raising his cup, "to my daughter Inanna, I shall give the high priesthood, I shall give her the divine throne." He began to hand over the me, one by one. "I give you kingship, I give you the shepherd's crook, I give you truth, I give you the art of the hero and the kindling of strife." The list went on. He gave her the craft of the carpenter, the skill of the musician, the wisdom of the elder, and even the terror of the battlefield. Inanna, her own mind still sharp, graciously accepted each and every gift. Without a moment's hesitation, she gathered up the sacred powers, loaded them all onto her boat of heaven, and pushed off from the docks of Eridu, making a swift getaway before her host could sober up. It is a timeless and valuable lesson, my sovereign. One should never, under any circumstances, mix cosmic society-defining powers with large quantities of beer. It is the celestial equivalent of waking up to discover you've given away the family fortune in a series of overly enthusiastic late-night emails. Sometime later, the fog in Enki's mind began to clear. He looked around his temple, and a terrible feeling dawned on him. Something was missing. "Isimud," he called to his vizier, "where is the high priesthood? Where is kingship? Where are all my sacred me?" Isimud could only state the obvious. "My master," he replied, "you have given them all to your daughter Inanna." Enki was horrified. The full weight of his foolishness crashed down upon him, bringing with it a divine hangover of epic proportions. "Go!" he commanded his vizier. "Take my sea monsters, the Enkum and the 50 giants of Eridu. You must pursue her. Follow her to Uruk and take the me back by force." The chase was on. 6 times, Enki's monstrous agents caught up to Inanna's boat as it sailed up the river. Each time, they seized the boat of heaven and declared that the me must return to Eridu. But each time, Inanna was saved by her own loyal vizier Ninshubur, the very same who had pleaded for her life while she was in the underworld. Ninshubur, a formidable warrior in her own right, fought off the sea monsters, and Inanna piloted the boat to safety. It seems that behind every successful and dramatic goddess is an extremely competent and overworked personal assistant, forever cleaning up the messes. Finally, her journey complete, Inanna sailed into the harbor of her own city, Uruk, with her prize. She triumphantly unloaded the sacred me and presented them to her people, who rejoiced. Their city was now the new center of civilization, their goddess the new guardian of its sacred powers. Enki, defeated and humbled, could only accept the new reality. This charming story, my sovereign, shows us a different side of the gods, not as remote arbiters of fate, but as flawed, relatable characters, driven by ambition, pride, and a weakness for a good party. And from a historical perspective, it likely tells a real story. The gradual transfer of religious and cultural dominance from the ancient fading city of Eridu to the vibrant growing metropolis of Uruk. The gods' squabbles so often mirrored the politics of the world below. With the me now firmly established in Uruk, civilization had a new capital. And one of the most important of these divine powers was the concept of kingship, the sacred duty of shepherding the people. This idea would find its ultimate mortal expression in Uruk's most famous ruler, a man who was 2/3 god and 1/3 man, a builder of walls and a seeker of eternal life. On our next night together we shall tell the tale of the great hero king himself, Gilgamesh. Sleep now and dream of the gifts of the gods, both those given freely and those cleverly stolen. The boat of heaven has arrived safely at the docks of Uruk, my sovereign, and its precious stolen cargo has been unloaded. The sacred me, the divine blueprints for civilization, now belong to the goddess Inanna. And chief among them, the one that would elevate her city above all others, was the me of kingship. But what is this power? It is more than a crown, more than a throne. In the minds of the people of Mesopotamia, kingship was not an invention of mortals. It was a gift from the gods. The ancient Sumerian king list, which we have spoken of before, begins with a simple, profound statement. When kingship was lowered from heaven, it did not evolve. It was bestowed. It was a sacred institution, the essential link between the chaotic world of mortals and the ordered realm of the divine. The king was not merely a ruler. He was the chosen shepherd of the people, the chief servant of the gods, the man selected by the Anunnaki council to maintain cosmic balance on the face of the earth. His duties were immense. First and foremost, he was the shepherd. This was the most common and beloved metaphor for a good king. He was to protect his flock, the people, from the wild wolves of enemy armies and lawlessness. He was to lead them to good pastures, to ensure the canals were dredged and the fields were irrigated so that the nation was prosperous and well-fed. His personal well-being was tied directly to the well-being of the land. But his most critical role was a religious one. Each city belonged to a god, and the king was the steward of the god's earthly estate. His primary task was to build and maintain the god's house, the great temple and its ziggurat. A king's legacy was measured in the splendor of the temples he built. By honoring the gods with magnificent dwellings, he ensured their continued presence and favor, which brought blessings upon the entire city. The king was, in essence, the chief priest, the one who stood in the doorway between the sacred and the profane. And in this role as intermediary, he was also the supreme judge. The gods were gods of order, and they demanded justice on earth. The king was tasked with protecting the weak from the strong, with ensuring that the orphan and the widow were not exploited. The famous law codes, like that of Hammurabi, were not presented as the king's own invention, but as commands given to him by the gods of justice, to be implemented for the good of the people. The selection of such a man was a divine affair. The great Anunnaki would gather in their celestial assembly. Anu and the great Enlil would gaze down upon the world of mortals, and from among them they would choose a man. His name would be called, his destiny proclaimed. The gods would then bestow upon him the symbols of his office, the holy crown that radiated a divine, terrifying aura, the scepter of command that none could defy, and the shepherd's crook, the symbol of his sacred duty to his people. The final seal of approval came from Enlil in his temple at Nippur, a blessing that legitimized the king's rule over all the land. One can imagine the divine job interview process was rather daunting. Your CV had to be impeccable, and a rejection from the board of directors could result in the utter ruin of your city. For some kings, this status as a chosen servant was not enough. They took a bolder, more audacious step. Starting with the great kings of the Akkadian Empire and later perfected by rulers like Shulgi of Ur, a new ideology emerged, the deification of the king himself. Rulers began to write their names with the symbol for divinity, the eight-pointed star, and in art, they were depicted wearing the horned helmet previously reserved only for the gods. Scholars still debate the true meaning of this. Was the king claiming to be an immortal god like Anu or Enlil? It is unlikely. It was more likely a claim to a unique and superior divine status on earth. He was not just the servant of the gods. He was their living embodiment, the perfect representative of the state, a god among men for as long as he lived. It was a powerful political statement, a way of saying that his authority was not merely granted by the gods, but was, in fact, divine in and of itself. This incredible power came with an equally incredible burden. The king was held personally responsible for everything. If the harvest failed, if a plague swept the city, if the army was defeated in battle, it was a clear sign that the king had lost the favor of the gods. He lived in a constant state of anxiety, forever performing rituals, sacrificing animals, and employing priests to read the omens in the entrails of sheep or the patterns of oil on water, all to divine the mood of his celestial shareholders. It was a job that required the skills of a CEO, a high priest, a five-star general, and a chief architect, all while managing a pantheon of notoriously temperamental deities. It is little wonder so many of them sought a promotion. This sacred institution, this divine gift of kingship, would find its most perfect and tragic expression in the very city that Inanna had made its new home. The legends that would be told for thousands of years spoke of a king of Uruk who was more than a man. A king who was born of a goddess and a mortal, two-thirds divine. A king who built the mighty walls of his city to protect his people, who journeyed to the cedar forest to slay a great monster, and who in his grief traveled to the very ends of the earth to confront the secret of death itself. He was the Anunnaki's greatest and most troublesome gift to the world. His name was Gilgamesh. His story is not just the tale of a perfect king, but the story of a flawed and powerful man wrestling with the ultimate question in a world ruled by immortal gods. Why must I die? And the tale of his great and terrible life is where we shall begin on our next night together. Sleep now, my sovereign, and dream of the weight of a divine crown. The sacred me of kingship is now secure in the great city of Uruk, my sovereign, a divine power waiting to be embodied by a mortal. And the one who would come to define that power was Uruk's own king, a man of legend whose story would be told and retold for thousands of years. He was the mighty Gilgamesh. He was a man unlike any other, a being forged by the gods themselves. Two-thirds of him was divine, from his mother, the wise goddess Ninsun. Only one-third of him was mortal. He was beautiful, powerful, and courageous beyond measure. He was the one who saw the deep, who knew the secret ways, and who brought back stories from before the great flood. It was he who built the mighty outer walls of Uruk and the sacred walls of its holy temple, the Eanna. He was, in every sense, the perfect king, the shepherd of his people. Except at the beginning, he was not. His immense power, his divine energy, was untempered by wisdom. He was arrogant and cruel. He strode through his own city like a wild bull, his head held high, acknowledging no equal. The poem says of his tyranny, "He leaves no son to his father. Day and night his outrageousness continues. He leaves no virgin to her lover, the warrior's daughter, the young man's bride." The people of Uruk, his flock, suffered under the heel of their own shepherd, and so they cried out, their lamentations rising from the streets of the city to the highest heaven, to the ears of the great Anunnaki. The gods listened. In their assembly, they heard the cries of the people of Uruk. They looked to the sky god Anu, and he commanded the great mother goddess Aruru to act. "You created this man," they said. "Now create his second self. Let there be one equal to his stormy heart. Let them contend with each other that Uruk may have peace." So Aruru, the goddess whose hands had first fashioned humanity from clay, washed her hands, took a pinch of that same divine clay, and cast it into the wilderness. And there, in the wild steppe, a new being was formed. His name was Enkidu. He was not like the men of the city. He was a wild man, his whole body covered in long matted hair. He knew nothing of people or of settled lands. He lived with the animals, eating grass alongside the gazelles and drinking from their watering holes. He was a child of nature, innocent and free, his heart filled with a simple wild peace. One day a trapper, setting his pits and snares, came face to face with this wild man. He was terrified. Day after day, Enkidu would appear and systematically destroy his traps, freeing the animals. The trapper went to his father, who gave him some wise advice. "Go to Uruk," he said. "Find the mighty Gilgamesh. Tell him of this wild man and ask him to send a temple courtesan, a woman named Shamhat, for no wild beast can resist her charms. When he comes to drink with the animals, she will tame him." Gilgamesh agreed to the plan, and Shamhat journeyed to the wilderness. She waited by the watering hole, and when Enkidu appeared with the herd, he was captivated by her beauty. For 6 days and 7 nights they were together, and she taught him the ways of humankind. When it was over, Enkidu sought to return to his herd. But the gazelles, who had been his family, took one look at him and fled. The wild creatures no longer accepted him. He had lost his speed, his animal grace, his connection to the wild. But as Shamat told him, he had gained something greater: wisdom and a human heart. It must be a rather startling end to a first date to find yourself suddenly and irrevocably ostracized by the entire animal kingdom. Shamhat clothed Enkidu and told him of the magnificent city of Uruk and of its king Gilgamesh, a man of such strength and power that he seemed like a god. Enkidu, now alone in the world and seeking a purpose, felt a fire light within him. He would go to Uruk and challenge this mighty king. This story, my sovereign, illustrates one of the great themes of the ancient world: the deep and complex tension between the wilderness and civilization. Enkidu represents the purity and innocence of nature, while Gilgamesh represents the power and corruption of the city. The epic does not argue that one is simply good and the other bad. Instead, it suggests that they need each other. Enkidu must be tamed to find his true purpose, and Gilgamesh must be confronted by the wild to find his true humanity. Enkidu arrived in Uruk, and the people marveled at his strength and his wild appearance. He soon learned of Gilgamesh's tyranny, of his practice of claiming every new bride for himself. Enraged, Enkidu resolved to stop him. He stood in the doorway of a wedding house, blocking the path, his feet planted like roots in the earth. When Gilgamesh arrived to claim the bride, he came face to face with his equal. The two great men seized each other. They wrestled in the street, a battle of titans that shook the walls and shattered the doorposts. They grappled and turned, two bulls locked in a primal conflict. In the end, Gilgamesh, with his divine strength, bent his knee and threw Enkidu to the ground. The fight was over, but as Gilgamesh turned away, Enkidu spoke words of praise for his strength, and Gilgamesh's anger vanished. He had found the one soul in all the world who was his match. Their fury turned to respect, and their respect turned to love. They embraced, and a friendship was forged in the dust of the city square. It is not perhaps the most conventional way to make a friend, but for demigods and wild men, it was apparently quite effective. The people of Uruk rejoiced, for their king had found his brother, his second self. His terrible, restless energy was no longer turned against his own people, but that energy had to go somewhere. One day, Gilgamesh turned to his new friend, his heart full of a desire for glory. "My friend," he said, "I cannot sit here in Uruk and let my name fade. We must do a great deed. Let us journey to the north, to the great cedar forest, and let us slay its fearsome guardian, the monster Humbaba. Let us cut down the sacred cedars and make for ourselves a name that will live on forever." And so the two friends, the king and the wild man, resolved to undertake a great and dangerous quest. It was a journey that would test their strength and their courage, and which would set in motion a terrible chain of events, attracting the attention of the gods themselves. But that is a tale for our next night. Sleep now, my sovereign, and dream of a friendship so strong it could shake the walls of a city. The two great friends, the king and the wild man, now stand united in the city of Uruk, my sovereign. But the boundless energy of Gilgamesh, which had once oppressed his people, could not be contained within the city walls. He yearned for a glorious deed, a quest that would write his name in the stars for all eternity, a journey to the fearsome cedar forest to slay its guardian, the monster Humbaba. This was more than a quest for fame. It was an act of kingship. A king, as the gods decreed, was a force for order, and Humbaba was a creature of chaos. It was Gilgamesh's duty to extend the law of the gods into the wild places of the world. They prepared for their great adventure. Smiths in the forges of Uruk crafted enormous bronze axes and mighty swords, weapons fit for heroes. But when Gilgamesh announced his plan to the elders of the city, they were filled with dread. "We were young men when we saw Humbaba," they warned him. "His roar is the sound of a flood, his mouth is fire, and his breath is death. He can hear a rustling in his forest from 60 leagues away. Why must you do this?" They reminded him that the forest was the sacred domain of the great god Enlil, and that Enlil himself had appointed Humbaba to be its terrifying guardian. To attack Humbaba was to defy the will of the storm god. Seeing their fear, but undeterred in his purpose, Gilgamesh led Enkidu to the temple to see his mother, the wise goddess Ninsun. She listened to her son's plan with a heavy heart. Seeing his resolve, she climbed to the roof of the temple, lit the sacred incense, and raised her arms to the sun god, the great Shamash, the lord of justice and light. "O Shamash," she prayed, "why have you given my son such a restless heart? Now you have spurred him to journey on a distant road, to face a battle he cannot be sure of winning. I ask you to watch over him, protect him until he returns to Uruk." Then she turned to Enkidu, and in a solemn rite, she adopted the wild man as her own son, placing a sacred pendant around his neck, and making the two friends brothers in spirit as well as in arms. Their journey was long and arduous. For 6 days they traveled, crossing 7 mountains, until they reached the edge of the legendary cedar forest. It rose before them like a great green wall, silent and forbidding. The sheer awesome majesty of the place filled even Gilgamesh with a mortal dread. He felt a weakness in his arms, a paralysis in his legs, but Enkidu, who had been born of the wild, gave him strength. "We have come this far, my friend," he said. "We will face this together." This quest, my sovereign, to bring order to a chaotic place by slaying a monster, is the very essence of the divine mandate of kingship. And while Gilgamesh's story is a myth, this principle found its most famous expression in a real and magnificent object, a tall black stone stele, carved in the city of Babylon more than 1,000 years after the time of the legendary Gilgamesh. This is the famous Code of Hammurabi. At the very top of this stone is a carving. On the right, the great sun god Shamash, the same god to whom Ninsun prayed, is seated on his throne, the symbols of divinity radiating from his shoulders. On the left, King Hammurabi stands before him in a posture of humble reverence, and the god is extending to the king the ring and the rod, the divine symbols of law and justice. The message is unmistakable. The laws written on this stone are not the mere invention of a mortal king. They are a gift from the God of justice himself. It is the ultimate act of divine delegation, the ancient equivalent of beginning your new company policy with the line, "As per my last meeting with the CEO of the universe." The laws themselves, nearly 300 of them, are a fascinating window into this ancient world. They cover everything from property rights and trade to family law and assault. They are famous for the principle of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But the reality was more complex. The justice you received depended heavily on who you were. The eye of a nobleman was worth far more than the eye of a commoner or a slave. It was a world of rigid order, where everyone had their place, and the law's purpose was to maintain that structure, a structure decreed and upheld by the gods. And now we must return to that dark forest, where Gilgamesh and Enkidu are about to impose their own form of divine order. They came face to face with the monster, Humbaba. The battle was terrible. The earth split. The sky went dark. Humbaba was a force of nature, and the two heroes were nearly overcome. But Gilgamesh, in his desperation, cried out to Shamash. And the sun god, hearing the prayer of Ninsun, sent 13 mighty winds that swirled around Humbaba, binding him, blinding him, and pinning him to the ground. Defeated, the great monster pleaded for his life. "Let me go, Gilgamesh," he wept. "I will be your servant. This forest will be yours. I will guard it for you." Gilgamesh, his heart moved by the plea, considered showing mercy, but Enkidu, his face hard, shouted a warning. "Do not trust him, my friend. The monster will betray you. Slay him and seize your glory before the great god Enlil hears what we have done." It is a rather direct philosophy of making new acquaintances. Either wrestle them into friendship, or, if that fails, simply remove their head. Gilgamesh listened to his friend. He drew his great sword, and together, the two heroes struck the monster's neck. The great head of Humbaba fell to the forest floor. They had done the impossible. They had defeated the guardian of the cedar forest. They had won for themselves a fame that would never die. They cut down the tallest of the sacred cedars and fashioned a great door for Enlil's temple in Nippur, hoping such a gift might appease the angry god. They built a raft, and with the monster's head as their trophy, they floated back down the river towards Uruk in triumph. But their victory, my sovereign, was not without consequence. They had brought order to the wilderness, but in doing so they had angered one of the most powerful of the Anunnaki. And their heroic deed had been watched from the heavens by another deity, the goddess of love and war, Inanna, and she was very, very impressed. Their troubles, my friend, were only just beginning. Sleep now, and dream of the silence that falls when a monster has been slain, a silence that is soon to be broken by the angry voice of a god. The heroes have returned to Uruk, my sovereign, their raft bearing the fearsome head of the monster Humbaba. They are triumphant, their names destined for glory. Gilgamesh, the mighty king, washes the grime of his long journey from his hair, casts off his dirty clothes, and dresses himself in the robes of his office. He places the royal crown upon his head, and as he stands in the sunlight, his beauty is a thing of divine and terrible power. And from the heavens, another pair of divine eyes was watching. The goddess Ishtar, whom the Sumerians called Inanna, gazed upon the perfection of Gilgamesh, and her heart was set on fire with desire. She descended from her celestial palace and appeared before the king, her voice as sweet as honeyed wine. "Come, Gilgamesh," she said, "be my husband. Grant me your love as a gift. I will give you a chariot of lapis lazuli and gold with wheels of electrum. You will be pulled by great storm demons. You will live in a house of fragrant cedar, and kings and princes will bow down to kiss your feet." It was a proposal of immense power, an offer to join with the most passionate of all the goddesses. But Gilgamesh, his heart still wild from his adventure, looked upon her, and his reply was not with flattery, but with a brutal, calculating scorn. "And what would I have to give you in return for being your husband?" he sneered. "You are a faulty door that lets in the winter wind, a shoe that bites the foot of its owner. What shepherd has ever loved you for long?" He then began to list, one by one, the fates of her former lovers. He spoke of Tammuz, the shepherd for whom she decreed yearly weeping. He spoke of the colorful roller bird, whose wings she broke. He spoke of the lion, for whom she dug 7 and 7 pits. He spoke of the stallion, whom she condemned to the whip and spur. He spoke of the gardener of her father's palace, who she turned into a blind mole, forced to live underground. "And if you love me," Gilgamesh concluded, "you will treat me just as you have treated them." It is, my sovereign, generally considered a poor romantic strategy to recite a goddess's entire history of failed relationships back to her face while rejecting her marriage proposal. The diplomatic skills of Gilgamesh, it must be said, were not nearly as developed as his fighting arm. Ishtar was utterly humiliated, her face contorted with rage, and she ascended to the heavens in a fury. She went weeping to her father, the great sky god Anu, and her mother Antu. "My father," she cried, "Gilgamesh has heaped insults upon me. He has recounted all of my despicable deeds and my faults." Then she made her demand. "Father, give me the bull of heaven. I will send it down to Uruk to gore that arrogant Gilgamesh. If you do not give me the bull, I will smash the gates of the underworld and release the dead to devour the living." Anu was troubled. "But if I give you the bull," he cautioned, "it will cause 7 years of famine on the earth. Have you prepared the people for this?" Ishtar, in her fury, confirmed that she had gathered enough grain in Uruk to protect the people. Her rage was matched only by her foresight, and so Anu reluctantly placed the leash of the bull of heaven in his daughter's hand. Here, my sovereign, in this very scene, we see a story being retold and reshaped. For the goddess here is not the Sumerian Inanna, she is Ishtar, the name given to her by the Akkadian people. The magnificent story of Gilgamesh was first told in the Sumerian language, in a series of shorter poems, but over centuries, the Sumerian culture was absorbed by their Semitic-speaking neighbors, the Akkadians, and later the Babylonians. The Sumerian language faded from common use, becoming a language of religion and scholarship, much like Latin in a later age. But the stories did not die. They were adopted, translated, and adapted by Akkadian scribes. They took the old Sumerian tales and wove them into the single grand narrative we now know as the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the process, the gods were given their Akkadian names. Inanna became Ishtar, Nanna became Sin, Enki became Ea. The stories were infused with new themes, new ideas, reflecting a new culture. The fading of the Sumerian tongue was not a death, but a transformation, a blending that allowed these ancient tales to live on in a new voice. And that new voice now tells of terror in Uruk. Ishtar unleashed the bull of heaven upon the city. It was a creature of immense destructive power. With the first snort from its nostrils, a great pit opened in the earth, and 100 young men of Uruk fell to their deaths. With its second snort, another pit opened, and 200 more perished. The city was in a panic, but Enkidu, the wild man, was without fear. He leaped into action. "My friend," he shouted to Gilgamesh, "we can do this. I will grab the bull by its tail and its thick tendons. You must move between the horns and the neck and plunge your sword into its heart." The two heroes worked as one. Enkidu, with his wild strength, taunted the beast and managed to seize it by the tail, using his body as an anchor. The great bull thrashed, but Enkidu held on, giving Gilgamesh the opening he needed. The king, with perfect timing, thrust his sword deep into the back of the bull's neck. The monster shuddered and fell dead. They had saved the city, but their defiance was not over. Ishtar appeared on the high walls of Uruk, screaming curses down upon them. "Woe to Gilgamesh, who has scorned me and killed the bull of heaven," she cried. Enkidu, hearing her, was filled with a primal rage. He ripped the right thigh from the bull's carcass and hurled it at the goddess's face. "If I could only get my hands on you," he roared, "I would do to you what I have done to this beast." Hurling a piece of a celestial bovine at a furious goddess is, even by heroic standards, an astonishing breach of etiquette. The two friends, triumphant, washed their hands in the Euphrates and were hailed as the saviors of Uruk. They held a great celebration that night in the palace, but their victory was a hollow one. They had now killed the guardian of Enlil's sacred forest and the prized beast of the goddess Ishtar. They had insulted the gods in a way that could not be ignored, and as the heroes slept, the great Anunnaki were meeting in council, their faces grim. A price would have to be paid for this great victory. A judgment was coming, one that would break the heart of the mighty Gilgamesh and send him on his final desperate journey. But that, my sovereign, is a story for another night. The celebrations in Uruk have fallen silent, my sovereign. The victory over the bull of heaven was great, but the cost is about to be greater. For the heroes have defied the gods, and the gods do not forget. While the city sleeps, a terrible dream comes to the wild man Enkidu. It is a vision of his own end. He awakens in a cold sweat and speaks to his friend. "My brother," he whispers, "listen to the dream I had last night. The heavens groaned and the earth answered. I stood alone, and I saw the great gods in council. Anu was there, and the warrior Enlil. The wise Ea was there, and the glorious sun god Shamash." In his dream, Enkidu saw the great Anunnaki debate the fate of the two heroes. Enlil, his heart still full of rage over the death of Humbaba, the guardian of his sacred forest, argued that they must be punished. "They have killed the bull of heaven and slain the guardian of the cedars," he declared. "One of them must die," and so they passed their sentence. Anu, the father, agreed with Enlil, but they decreed that Gilgamesh, the king, the one who was 2/3 divine, would be spared. The price for their transgressions would be paid with the life of the wild man, the one who had been created as his second self. Enkidu was to die. When Gilgamesh hears this, his eyes fill with tears. "My brother, my dear brother," he weeps. "Why do they blame you instead of me?" But the judgment of the gods was final. A profound sickness fell upon Enkidu. He lay on his bed, his great strength leaving him, and in his grief and pain, he began to curse the life he had been given. He cursed the great cedar gate they had brought back from the forest as a trophy. He cursed the trapper who had first discovered him in the wilderness. And most bitterly, he cursed Shamhat, the temple courtesan who had tamed him and led him to civilization, to the friendship that had now cost him his life. But as his bitter words filled the air, the voice of the sun god Shamash called down from the heavens. "Enkidu," the god said, "why do you curse the woman Shamhat? Was it not she who gave you the food fit for gods and the wine fit for kings? Was it not she who clothed you in splendor and gave you the mighty Gilgamesh for your companion?" Shamash reminded him of the love and honor he had found in the world of men. Hearing the god's words, Enkidu's heart was calmed. He retracted his curse and turned it into a blessing. This scene from Enkidu's dream, "My sovereign," the vision of a great assembly of gods passing judgment, is a powerful motif that echoes far beyond the lands of Sumer. The structure of this divine pantheon, a high god, a council of other powerful deities who advise and consent, was a common pattern throughout the ancient Near East. The Mesopotamian Anunnaki, presided over by Anu or Enlil, have a striking parallel in the myths of their western neighbors, the Canaanites of Ugarit. The Canaanite pantheon was ruled by a remote, powerful father god named El, whose name is the simple word for God. He was the ultimate authority, and he presided over a divine council composed of his 70 children, the sons of El. This assembly, just like the Anunnaki, would meet to decide the fates of gods and mortals, to resolve disputes, and to maintain the cosmic order. The thunder god Baal would contend for power. The sea god Yam would issue challenges, but the final authority rested with El and his council. This mirroring of heavenly structures, a king with his court of nobles, shows a shared way of understanding how power and order function, an idea that resonated for millennia across many cultures. It is a rather sobering thought to be judged by a committee of immortals, the ultimate human resources review from which there is no appeal, and whose only verdicts are acquitted or utterly doomed. Enkidu's doom was now sealed. He lingered for 12 days, his sickness growing worse. As he lay dying, he told Gilgamesh of one final terrifying dream. He saw himself seized by a fearsome demon with the talons of an eagle who dragged him down to the House of Dust, the grim underworld of Queen Ereshkigal. It was the land of no return, where former kings and priests now served the dead, eating clay and drinking dirt in the endless dark. Then, his story told, Enkidu fell silent. Gilgamesh sat by his bedside, watching, waiting. He watched for a day, and then another. On the 12th day, Enkidu did not move. Gilgamesh reached out and touched his chest, but his heart was no longer beating. His friend, his brother, the other half of his own soul, was gone. A grief unlike any other seized Gilgamesh. He roared like a lioness robbed of her cubs. He tore at his hair and his fine royal robes. He veiled the face of his friend like a bride, and for 7 days and 7 nights he would not allow him to be buried, hoping he might yet rise. But he did not. The wild man had returned to the clay from which he was made. And as Gilgamesh wept, a new and terrible feeling took root in his heart: fear. He looked at the still body of his mighty friend, and for the first time he truly understood his own mortality. "When I die," he whispered to himself, "shall I not be just like Enkidu? Sorrow has entered my belly. I am afraid of death." In his grief, the mighty king's immediate reaction was to embark on the most ambitious and frankly impossible self-help quest in history. He would find the secret to not dying. He remembered the stories of Utnapishtim, the man who survived the great flood and was made immortal by the gods. Gilgamesh, the king who had everything, now wanted the one thing he could not have. He resolved to journey to the ends of the earth to find Utnapishtim and learn from him the secret of eternal life. He cast aside his kingship. He threw off his royal garments and dressed himself in the rough skins of a lion. He abandoned his great city of Uruk and set out alone, a grieving wanderer, into the wild steppe. His first great quest for fame was over. Now began his last, desperate quest for life itself. And the tale of that perilous journey, my sovereign, is a story for our next night. The great king of Uruk is a king no more, my sovereign. He is a wanderer, a grieving brother dressed in the rough skins of a lion, his face etched with sorrow and a terrible new fear. The death of his friend Enkidu has shattered his world, and now he is haunted by a single obsessive question. Why must I die? He has turned his back on his city, on his power, on his very identity, to chase the whisper of a legend, the one mortal man who escaped death, Utnapishtim. And so Gilgamesh walks east toward the rising sun on a quest for life itself. He journeys for leagues uncounted, across the wild steppe where his friend was born. He eats the raw flesh of the beasts he hunts and wears their skins upon his back. He is driven by a grief so profound that it propels him to the very edge of the world, to the great twin-peaked mountain called Mashu, the place that guards the rising and the setting of the sun. The peaks of this mountain scrape the vault of heaven, and its foundations reach deep into the underworld. It is a place of cosmic passage, a doorway between the realms. And at the gate of this mountain pass, there stood two guardians of a terrifying majesty. They were the scorpion beings, a male and a female, whose nature was a mixture of mortal and divine. The epic tells us that their aura was an awesome, unbearable light, and their glance was death itself. The male scorpion being saw Gilgamesh approaching, ragged and gaunt, and he spoke to his mate. "The one who comes to us," he said. "His body is the flesh of the gods." His mate replied, "2/3 of him is God, but 1/3 of him is human." They challenged the weary traveler, their voices like the scraping of stone. "Why have you traveled so far?" they demanded. "Why have you come to this place where no mortal has ever set foot?" Gilgamesh, who had once been the most arrogant of kings, was now humbled by his grief. He did not boast. He shielded his eyes from their terrible light and told them the truth. "I have come here," he said, his voice thick with sorrow, "because of my friend Enkidu, whom I love dearly. He has gone to the destiny of mortals, and I am afraid. I look upon his face and I see my own fate. I have come to find my ancestor Utnapishtim, who stood in the assembly of the gods and was granted eternal life. I must ask him the secret of death and life." The scorpion beings were moved by his story, but the male guardian gave him a solemn warning. "The path you wish to take is impossible, Gilgamesh," he said. "The way through the mountain is 12 leagues long. The darkness within is absolute. There is no light." But Gilgamesh, his heart set on his quest, would not be deterred. Seeing his resolve, the scorpion being sighed and stood aside. "Go, Gilgamesh," he said. "May the mountain pass, let you go in safety." And the great gate of the sun's path swung open. Gilgamesh plunged into the darkness. It was a blackness unlike any other, a solid, suffocating void. He could not see what was before him, nor could he see what was behind. The only sounds were the desperate pounding of his own heart and the whisper of his own breath. He walked for 1 league. The darkness was dense. He walked for 2 leagues, for 3, for 4. There was no light. The journey through the mountain pass is a perfect example of what scholars call a liminal space, a threshold between the known and the unknown. It is a symbolic death, a journey through the underworld of the soul, from which a hero must emerge transformed before he can enter the realm of the gods. And Gilgamesh's journey was far from over. He walked for 9 leagues, and he felt a north wind on his face, but still he could see nothing. 10 leagues, 11 leagues. The darkness pressed in on him. Finally, at the end of the 12th league, a glimmer of light appeared ahead. He stumbled forward, running now, and burst out of the blackness into a world of dazzling, impossible light. He found himself in a garden of unearthly beauty. It was a grove where the trees bore not fruit, but jewels. The branches were heavy with glittering carnelian and precious lapis lazuli. Thorns and thistles were made of hematite and shimmering agate. It was a divine paradise, a place where the gods themselves might walk. At the edge of this garden, by the shore of a great sea, sat a tavern, and in the doorway sat its keeper, the wise and ancient alewife, the goddess Siduri. Seeing the haggard, wild-looking man dressed in animal skins approaching, she was frightened and quickly barred her door. But Gilgamesh pleaded with her, first boasting of his great deeds, and then, when that failed, telling her the true, sad story of his grief for Enkidu and his great fear of death. Siduri, her heart moved, opened her door, and gave the king some of the wisest and most poignant advice in all of literature. "Gilgamesh, where are you wandering?" she asked gently. "The life that you seek, you never will find. For when the gods created mankind, they allotted death to mankind, but life they retained in their own keeping. As for you, Gilgamesh, let your belly be full. Day and night, dance and be merry. Let your clothes be fresh, wash your head, and bathe in water. Look at the child that is holding your hand, and let your wife delight in your embrace. For this is the true task of mankind." It is a testament to the depth of his grief, my sovereign, that Gilgamesh could journey to the edge of the world, receive this perfect, beautiful advice from a divine being. And his first thought was, essentially, "Thank you, that's very profound. Now how do I get across this ocean?" He could not accept her wisdom. He could not accept his mortal fate. He asked her how he could cross the sea to find Utnapishtim. Siduri told him the journey was impossible, for the waters he wished to cross were the waters of death, and any mortal who touched them would instantly perish. But, she said, there was one who might be able to help. Utnapishtim's own ferryman, a man named Urshanabi, was nearby in the woods. And so Gilgamesh, his hope renewed, set off to find him, to attempt the final, most dangerous stage of his journey. "Sleep now, my sovereign, and dream of a garden where the trees bear jewels. For tomorrow we shall follow the desperate king as he attempts to cross the one river that no living man is meant to cross. The great King Gilgamesh stands at the edge of the world, my sovereign, having been given the wise and gentle advice to abandon his quest and embrace his mortal life. But his heart, still raw with grief, cannot accept it. He must find Utnapishtim. And so he seeks out the ferryman, Urshanabi, to cross the final barrier, the waters of death. Finding Urshanabi in the woods, Gilgamesh, in a fit of restless rage, takes his axe and smashes the sacred stone things that protected the ferry, destroying the only means of safe passage. Urshanabi informs him of his foolish mistake. The only way across now is by a great and difficult labor. He commands Gilgamesh to cut 120 long poles from the forest. With these, he will punt the boat across the lethal waters, discarding each pole the moment it touches the sea, ensuring his own hands never make contact. After a long and wearying journey, a voyage of desperate, silent effort, he arrives on the distant shore. There he finally meets him, Utnapishtim, the faraway, the man who survived the great flood. Utnapishtim looks upon the ragged, grief-stricken king and asks him why he wanders so. Gilgamesh pours out his story, his love for Enkidu, and his all-consuming fear of his own death. Utnapishtim listens patiently and then speaks, his voice calm with the wisdom of ages. "Do we build a house to stand forever?" he asks. "Is a contract sealed to last for all time? Life and death are a part of a fate decreed by the great Anunnaki. They have allotted the days of our lives, but the day of our death they do not disclose." He then offers Gilgamesh a simple test. "If you truly wish to conquer death," he says, "first you must try to conquer its younger brother, sleep. Stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. Gilgamesh, exhausted beyond measure by his journey, agrees, and as he sits down, a mist of sleep, like a fog rolling in from the sea, envelops him. He sleeps. Utnapishtim turns to his wife with a gentle, knowing smile. "Look at this strong man who wants eternal life," he says. Sleep blows over him like a storm. To prove how long he sleeps, Utnapishtim's wife bakes a single loaf of bread for each day and places it beside his head. When Gilgamesh finally awakens on the seventh day, he sees the 7 loaves before him, one fresh, one stale, one moldy, one crumbling to dust. He has failed the simplest of tests. His quest for immortality is impossible. His spirit broken, Gilgamesh prepares to return to his world, empty-handed. But Utnapishtim's wife, taking pity on him, convinces her husband to offer him a farewell gift. Utnapishtim tells him of a final, secret hope. There is a plant, he says, that grows at the bottom of the ocean. It has thorns like a rose and will prick your hand. But if a man can obtain it, it will restore his youth. Hope surging in his heart once more, Gilgamesh ties heavy stones to his feet and sinks to the bottom of the sea. He finds the thorny plant, and though it tears at his hands, he takes it. He decides not to eat it himself, but to carry it back to his city, Uruk, and test it first on an old man. It is a flicker of new wisdom, of caution and care for others. But on his long journey home, he stops to bathe in a cool pool of water, leaving the precious plant on the bank. A snake, drawn by the plant's sweet fragrance, slithers out of the grass, seizes the plant, and eats it. As it glides away, it sheds its old skin, its youth restored. And so, Gilgamesh is left with nothing. He sits down and weeps, his final hope stolen from him. He returns to Uruk, a changed man. As he and the ferryman approach the city, Gilgamesh looks upon it as if for the first time. He gestures to the magnificent walls he built, the very walls that had seemed like a prison at the start of his tale. Urshanabi, he says, his voice quiet, climb the wall of Uruk, walk along it, inspect its foundation platform, touch its brickwork, see if its bricks are not baked in a kiln, and if its foundations were not laid by the 7 sages themselves. In that moment, he has his answer. He has not conquered death, but he has found a different kind of immortality. A king's life is not in his own breath, but in the city he builds, the people he protects, the story he leaves behind. This, at last, is the wisdom he has gained. And this brings us to our final question, my sovereign, here on our 25th night. How did his story, and all the stories of the Anunnaki we have told, survive to reach our ears tonight? For after these great cities fell, the gods fell silent. Their names were forgotten, their temples crumbled into dust, and the language in which their tales were written became a mystery of dashes and wedges that no one could read. For 2,000 years, the Anunnaki slept. Then, in the middle of the 19th century, European explorers and archaeologists began to dig into the strange mounds that dotted the landscape of modern-day Iraq. At a place called Kuyunjik, they unearthed the ruins of the mighty Assyrian city of Nineveh. And there, in the buried palace of the last great king, Ashurbanipal, they found his library, a room full of tens of thousands of broken clay tablets. In 1872, a quiet, self-taught genius at the British Museum named George Smith was patiently sorting through these fragments. One day he began to translate a tablet from the Gilgamesh series. As he read the lines, he realized with a jolt of pure excitement that he was reading a detailed account of a great flood, a story with astonishing parallels to the biblical tale of Noah, but written 1,000 years earlier. The legend says that upon this realization, George Smith became so overjoyed that he leaped to his feet and began to take off his clothes in the middle of the museum. It is a powerful reminder that the greatest academic breakthroughs are often met not with a solemn nod, but with a giddy, half-naked victory lap. That discovery gave a voice back to this lost world. The Anunnaki began to speak again, through the patient work of scholars who pieced together their stories. They became a subject of profound academic interest, revealing the deep roots of our own myths and religions. But their legacy did not end there. In the 20th century, these ancient gods had a rather surprising career change. Writers like Zecharia Sitchin proposed a new interpretation, that the Anunnaki were not gods at all, but flesh-and-blood extraterrestrials from a hidden planet named Nibiru. In this telling, they came to Earth eons ago to mine for gold, and they genetically engineered humanity to be their slave race. From divine council to alien mining corporation, it is a testament to the power of these stories that they can be so radically reimagined. Whether we see them as gods who govern our fate, as literary figures who reveal our deepest fears, or as ancient astronauts who built our pyramids, the Anunnaki continue to do what they have always done. They provide an answer to our oldest questions. Who are we? Why are we here? And what happens when we are gone? Their stories are the first great human epic, a tale of creation and destruction, of love and of loss, of the eternal struggle between the wildness in our hearts and the civilization we build with our hands. And the walls of Uruk, which Gilgamesh built, still stand today, a quiet testament to the hero who learned that true immortality is found not in living forever, but in leaving a story worth telling. And now, my sovereign, my own story is at an end. 25 nights I have sat before you and spun these tales from the dust of ages. I thank you for the gift of your time and the gift of my life. May your own story be a long and happy one. Sleep well.